in-person meeting. During the coronavirus disease emergency, this meeting will be convened remotely until this committee is legally authorized to meet in person. Public comments will be available on each item on this agenda. Each speaker will be allowed 3 minutes to speak. Comments or opportunity to speak during the public comment period are available via phone call by calling 415-655-0001. Again, it's 415-655-0001. Access code 146-118-8903. Again, 146-118-8903. Then pound and then pound again. When connected, you will hear the meeting discussions, but you will be muted and in listening mode only. When your item of interest comes up, dial *3 to be added to the speaker line. Best practices are to call from a quiet location, speak clearly and slowly, and turn down your television or radio. Alternatively, you may submit public comment via email to mary.hom@sfgov.org, and it would be forwarded to the committee and will be included as part of the official files. Please note that this meeting is recorded and will be available at sfgovtv.org.
All right. Well, we're going to call this meeting of the Our City, Our Home Oversight Committee to order. It's October 20th, 2020. And please call the roll.
Member Andrews?
Here.
Vice Chair D'Antonio?
I'm here.
Member Friedenbach?
She's here. I see her.
Muted, but here.
She's here. Member Haynes?
Sorry about that, you guys. I was using the space bar and it wasn't working.
Ah, got it.
I'm here. Sorry.
I'm here.
Now.
Member Haynes, is that you?
Yes, I'm here.
Great, thank you. Member Ledbetter?
Here.
Member Miller, sorry. Member Miller? Absent. Member Nagendra?
Here.
Member Reggio?
Here.
Member Williams?
Present.
Chair Williams?
Here.
Great. At this time, you have a quorum.
Thank you. So we'll now move into item 2 for public comment. So do we have any public comment at this time?
So item number 2 is opportunity for the public to comment on any matters within the committee's jurisdiction that are not on the agenda. Members of the public who wish to provide public comment on this item should call 415-655-0001, access code 146-118-8903, then pound and then pound again. If you haven't already done so, please dial *3 to line up to speak. A system prompt will indicate that you have raised your hand. Please wait until the system indicates you have been unmuted and you may begin your comment. Please note that you will have 3 minutes. I'm checking now to see if there's anybody raising their hands. You have one. I'm going to go ahead and unmute this person and allow this person to speak for 3 minutes.
Good morning. My
Good
name
morning.
is Sandra Dratler. I am a leader in Faith in Action Bay Area and Faith in Action at St. James Episcopal Church in the Richmond District. I am here today with other leaders in Faith in Action. Faith in Action Bay Area is a network of over 100 congregations and individual community leaders in San Francisco and San Mateo counties working to uphold the dignity of all people. We are a multiracial, multilingual, intergenerational, and cross-class organization that is led by those most affected by injustice, such as low-income renters and workers, immigrants, women, and youth. We are bound together by a shared commitment to winning and ensuring the full rights of all people in our communities and the desire to connect our spiritual beliefs with our civic actions and practices. Prior to the pandemic, our housing advocacy focused on obtaining city rent subsidies for low-income seniors at risk of becoming unhoused. This need arose from the experience of our Latinx leaders in the Mission District who find themselves unable to meet the requirements to obtain the, quote, affordable housing opening in their neighborhood. The pandemic expanded our scope of issues as we made outreach calls to the community and heard that the priority of rent subsidies was now joined with our dire need to obtain safe shelter for unhoused elders in our neighborhoods. Our advocacy turned into our campaign for No Seniors Without Homes, which has three priorities: moving vulnerable homeless seniors to hotels as an emergency measure, assuring that they can move into safe permanent housing when their time in the hotels ends, and continuing focus on preventing vulnerable seniors from falling into homelessness. We are currently phone banking around the election, which has been a great opportunity to do further listening in our community on issues that are highest priority for them. No doubt many of the issues coming forward will relate to the work of this committee. You have a unique opportunity to creatively address the issue of homelessness in San Francisco by creating new or improved accountable mechanisms and structures for financing and delivering services. My fellow leaders and I will be walking with you during this process, providing input along the way. We look forward to your good work and the day we can be together in person. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So is there any further public comment on?
Give me 1 second. Hello, caller. No additional public comment at this point.
Okay, thank you. We'll move into item 3, approval with possible modification of the minutes from September 16th. Is there a motion?
Brett Andrews, so moved.
So it's been moved. Is there a second?
Second it.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Sorry, this is John Gibner.
Aye.
Sorry, John.
Sorry to interrupt. Before the vote, on each item, you should take public comment.
Okay.
So you had general public comment at the start, but for each item, either sometime during the discussion or anytime before you take any votes, the committee needs to take public comment.
Great. So public on approval of the minutes.
Great. Members of the public who wish to provide public comment on this item should call 415-655-0001, access code 146-118-8903, then pound and then pound again. If you haven't already done so, please dial *3 to line up to speak. A system prompt will indicate you have raised your hand. Please wait until the system indicates you have been unmuted, and you may begin your comments. Please note that you will have 3 minutes. Give me 1 second, checking to see if we have any callers.
In the meantime, can I just note that it doesn't appear that the minutes have been posted publicly, and there was a recording of the meeting. And so, are we approving the recording, or is there a written minutes? I've gotten a lot of questions from people about that.
So the minutes are posted in the September section. There's a link that says minutes to it. So they are posted. I'm happy to send you the direct link if that would be helpful.
No, got it. I just wanted to make sure the public knew where to find these items, because it's been a little confusing for folks I think a lot of times people don't think about going on the Office of the Controller website to find documents. And so I think we just need to keep making it clear to folks where to go for information about these meetings.
Thank you. Thank you, Member Friedenbach. Is there any public comment at this time? Or
There are no public comment.
All right, so it's already been moved and seconded, and all in favor of approving the minutes from September 16th, 2020, say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, it's been moved unanimously. So we'll now go to, is Marlo Simmons present?
She is on the attendee list, Mary.
Okay, I'll go ahead and.
Sorry, Chair Williams. Again, we had a request to change the order of the agenda items to have Abigail's presentation first so that Marlo can join later. If you want to take the agenda items out of order, that's permissible.
Okay, so, and then I know that for mental health SF, we want to have the supervisors here to respond to questions. So are we still in line with that timeline for if we're moving Abigail?
Yes, I checked with their staff yesterday and it seemed to be fine.
I have Marlo Simmons on the line.
Oh, thank you.
And we're actually going to take, so we're actually taking item 5. This is first, background presentation on existing city strategic plans and current system and possible action by committee in response to this presentation. So we have Abigail Stewart-Kahn, the interim director of HSH, here to actually present to us first. So is Abigail here?
I'm here, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, so we'll move to your item if you want to begin your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, members of this remarkable committee on this auspicious day. I didn't say much the last time except how excited I was to be here, and it's wonderful to see you all. And echoing what I heard from the public commenter, I look forward to being together in person as we continue to move through this pandemic. I have been asked by the committee to share background on HSH's strategic framework, a little bit of history about the work, and a brief update, very, very brief, about how the strategic framework is playing through during this pandemic. So, Chair, with your permission, I will begin to share my slides. This is always the moment of truth on technology, so please just bear with me if I can't get this to work. Can somebody let me know that they can see my slides?
We can't see them
Sorry,
yet.
give me 1 second. Let me make sure you do have. Okay, can you try now?
Okay, let me try again. Hold on, I had tried already. Let's try again. How are we doing now?
We can see them.
It's in presenter mode. I'm not sure if you need to go to full screen.
Yeah, thank you. So are you seeing, apologies, we worked this out beforehand. Are you seeing kind of the current slide and the future slide mode? Because I'm currently, thank you, member. I am currently seeing my full screen. So just give me a second to try to sort this out.
Yes, we can see it now.
The full screen?
Presenter mode.
Okay, everybody just wants to join my presentation today, I think. Hang on, let me try this again. I'm gonna stop sharing and try again. Even with a dress rehearsal, I'm having challenges. How about now?
Yes.
Wonderful. Again, my name is Abigail Stewart-Kahn. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the interim director of the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. Thank you for inviting me here today. As I begin and throughout, if anybody knows me, I spend quite a lot of time on gratitude. And I think that that is particularly important during a global pandemic to lift up the people experiencing homelessness, whose voices we listen to as closely as we possibly can, all the way through all of our stakeholders, to thank them both for their input, guidance, and also their remarkable collaborative work. I'd also like to thank the mayor, the board, some of whom are here with us today. And I know we're joined by the local homelessness coordinating board, the Shelter Grievance Advisory Committee, our remarkable nonprofit partners, HSH staff, and partners at the COVID Command Center who have made some of the work that I'm talking about possible today. And so I'm delighted to share an update on the City and County of San Francisco's homelessness response system, knowing that I am simply the ambassador of this message. Hoping that the slide has advanced. Chair, I can see your face, so if you could continue to give me some visual cues, I would appreciate it. Thank you very much. The Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing launched in October of 2016. The intent of the founders was to combine resources and staff from 5 city agencies to create a laser-focused, coordinated response on homelessness. San Francisco has been very ahead and has a lot to be proud of, thanks to many people on this committee, on unique approaches to homelessness, but the founders of the department felt that the city was behind on a coordinated and strategic approach. The department formed its mission to make homelessness in San Francisco rare, brief, and one time. And I'm very happy to speak about what those terms mean. They're quite defined in our strategic framework and in national best practice. For reference, I joined the department in August of 2017 as the Director of Strategic Partnerships to take the community input that had already been collected before my time and the national best practice, and to issue the 5-year strategic framework in October of 2017. So that's just one milestone. You can't just write a plan. So since then and even during that time, we were hard at work. The homelessness response system is really the foundation of all of our work. We talk about 6 core components of the homelessness response system. I will say there is so much conversation appropriately about homelessness in San Francisco. And so one thing we find very helpful is to focus on these 6 core components so we can locate and navigate all of the service-rich environment and have people understand, at least for the department, where these pieces of work slot in. So we have outreach. The department and actually the Department of Public Health do a tremendous amount of outreach, some through direct civil servants and some through contractors. We do problem solving and prevention work, which in other communities is called diversion and prevention work, and we can get into what each of these things mean. We launched coordinated entry, which is a national best practice that had started up in San Francisco and moved more robustly with our partners in the last 2 years. We have shelter, housing, and the housing ladder. And we will get into more of the definitions of these, but I will always kind of come back to these as the 6 core components of a strong homelessness response system. So as we go through, we have outreach around street homelessness. Most famous among these is the homeless outreach team you see pictured here. This team is a combination of public service and civil servants, as well as a nonprofit provider. And they do work across the city. Their mission is to look for the most vulnerable among the homeless population, but also to provide basic resources to everybody. So here you see a mask being handed out. We've had to pivot back and forth, for example, between masks that are important for air quality and masks that are important for COVID. So this is a team that is constantly learning. They are responsible for bringing inside over half of the individuals who have come into the shelter-in-place hotels, just for some sort of COVID context. And they are not the only outreach staff in the field. We have other contracts that focus on young people and so on, so that we can be culturally responsive in our community. Several years ago, the Department of Emergency Management and several other partners formed HSOC, the Healthy Streets Operations Center, which is currently under the Department of Emergency Management. HSH provides an encampment resolution team, so our HOT team members are part of HSOC, but not the whole part of HSOC. And there's a lot of really good work that sort of been going up and down with HSOC. I feel we're in a strong position with our partners now. Problem solving and prevention, again, diversion and prevention. We've been very focused during the pandemic to update our update our prevention strategies and allocate money that we already had available for homelessness prevention, which is somewhat different, although related to eviction prevention, and I'm happy to get into the details of that. That will become very important for the Prop C committee to attend to. For us, and I'm not trying to pass judgment in either direction about the importance of either, but just for us, homelessness prevention services focus on the moment of housing crisis so that we have a better understanding of focusing our resources of the homelessness response system to people who we have much more predictability will become homeless or are literally homeless if intervention does not occur. And I'm hoping I'm being clear there. So we are intentionally not all that far upstream. We rely on many other partners to create an affordable city, to work very hard on that, to work on eviction defense, all very critical, important parts of an infrastructure. But ours begins at sort of the moment of housing crisis. Famous programs in this area are Homeward Bound, which reunite friends and family and partner with community to connect. Incredible stories here. There's also increasingly training for all of our system of care. They're training us and we're training with them around how we say to people, we don't want you to come into the homelessness response system tonight. Even the best shelter is not where I want you to sleep tonight by yourself or with your family. And so what does it look like to get safe tonight? And then somebody might say, well, I could stay with my uncle if I was able to do X, Y, or Z. Some of this has adjusted pretty significantly because of COVID. So ideas like staying with your uncle have certainly become more challenging. And yet we know those solutions and we know that the resilience of people experiencing homelessness is profound. And so we continue to lift up these prevention diversion strategies. Coordinated entry it's our pathway to equity. And we will need to go into much deeper dives on equity with this committee, but I really just want to focus on why coordinated entry is important. It helps us to preserve scarce resources for people who are the most vulnerable among the homeless population. And so, for example, people who are in the SIP hotels are the most vulnerable to COVID. And then we also have a population of people who are most vulnerable, longest term homeless. And coordinated entry is the data and assessment approach that allows us to understand how to match which housing intervention or which treatment, not to make this a sort of treatment-based approach, not this sort of sense of medical treatment, but the best intervention to the right person. And I know I should have started by saying that many on this committee are experts in this and helped us to write this strategy. So I'm trying to sort of make sure we're laying the groundwork and would ask for the patience and grace of the people who are in fact expert in this. And feel free to add comments as we wrap up according to the discretion of the chair. We have coordinated entry for youth, coordinated entry for adults, and coordinated entry for families. In San Francisco, we began with the family system of care, moved to the adult system of care, and are fully launched with the youth system of care. We do not yet have all of the data, nor do we have the single unifying database available to fully drive this system. And it could be interesting at some point in the future to learn where we are accelerating our data work. But we are fully launched and we are just launched. So coordinated entry was about to enter a CQI, a quality, continuous quality improvement phase of its development because it was just launched when the pandemic hit. And so we are intending to use the pandemic to speed coordinated entry process and navigation to housing. Shelter is often the most talked about in our community. Certainly the Prop C legislation imagines some expansion and values the importance of shelter for safety. I will just add that we consider safe sleeping villages, for example, to be a form of shelter, though they don't have a roof over them or a lock on the front door. And so during COVID, they've been a very important response. And we know from our unhoused neighbors that these kinds of outdoor safe places to be are something that's very valuable to them. And we've learned quite a lot from national best practice and also from our own experimentation really during COVID about what is a successful safe sleep approach and what's a more challenged one. Of course, a little bit older in San Francisco, our navigation centers We change our process in the winter. We change our process during various forms of inclement weather. And then we have the general temporary shelter, traditional shelter. HSH and nationally, transitional housing is considered shelter. It's confusing based on the term. The reason is because people aren't on the lease, and so it's not a permanent exit from homelessness. So just sort of locating for people where we put things in our buckets. And then housing. We know housing is the solution to homelessness, and we know more than ever during this pandemic that housing is healthcare. And so I really want to lift up the providers and the HSH staff out there who work every day to maintain people's housing. We have a very low eviction rate in our very vast permanent supportive housing portfolio. And permanent supportive housing was begun by many of you here in San Francisco, so it's something we can be very proud of. And we have permanent supportive housing and other housing solutions for every aspect of our system of care. One thing that is not as frequently discussed are medium-term housing solutions. Some people call these things like rapid rehousing, which we can get into. We locate that again in our housing bucket. Another thing I really want to draw attention to is that during the pandemic, with philanthropic partners and nonprofit partners, we've been able to launch a flexible housing subsidy pool, which is a way to pool resources and create a scattered site approach to housing. So here you see a beautiful picture inside, I believe, a TNDC building. This is a beautiful kind of mosaic made by tenants in that building together before COVID, when people could do art projects together. And we visited that building and just admired this art tremendously. So people think of permanent supportive housing as a building, but we need to continue to push ourselves to think of permanent supportive housing as affordable housing with supportive services. And the where is very flexible. So you can have a scattered site approach where a caseworker might visit you or call you, or you can be in a building like the one pictured in this beautiful work of art. The housing ladder is a relatively new component of our homelessness response system. Everything about homelessness is about flow. It's about preventing people from coming into homelessness, and once the crisis occurs, from flowing people out as quickly as possible. A housing ladder concept acknowledges that while permanent supportive housing needs to be permanent, there are people who, when housed for many years or for a short period of time, want to move on. But in an environment as expensive as San Francisco, while they don't need the rich social services anymore provided via permanent supportive housing, they might in fact need affordable housing. And so the Moving On initiative was a model where we paired a housing authority voucher with services, lighter services, and people moved on into the community. And since the housing authority was unable to continue to provide those vouchers, though we have some hope on that front going forward, we've pivoted this approach to be buildings that are in different communities, buildings that are in that have more amenities, so we can help people to move on, and we've continued that during COVID. Taking steps many months ago, before COVID, if anybody can even remember that, and before as the department formed, we talked to people experiencing homelessness, we talked to expert providers, we talked to expert HSH staff, and we said, what does it look like for a person experiencing homelessness? And this was actually this is the image that drew me to this work, because we saw a similar approach in the child abuse and family violence world, which is where I come from, where each arrow represents an actual path that a person experiencing homelessness has to take, and an actual interview or conversation where they have to share their story of perhaps why they became homeless and what help they need. And we know as a community that this is not a trauma-informed approach, even though each person in each of these blue squares wanted to do the right thing. And so we had this fractured system of care, robust but fractured, and the people experiencing homelessness would have a different experience of the system based on which door they knocked on. So if they knocked on Chair Williams' door and she was one of the best caseworkers in the city, they might have one experience, but if they knocked on a different caseworker's door who was maybe newer and had less support and supervision, they had an entirely different experience. And of course, this leads to gross inequity and relies on the resources of the person experiencing homelessness, which means that people who have more resource often do better, which is the reverse of what we want our system of care to do. We want it to take care of the most vulnerable. And so this is the homelessness response system now. This image is not perfect. We're constantly trying to improve upon it, but I hope people can see themselves in our system of care and the 6 core components located within here. So for example, you could see where the Healthy Streets Operations Center is working with outreach and encampments and referring into our system of care, into shelter, into the coordinated entry system. In fact, our HOT team can do assessments in the field for coordinated entry, for example. We also know that hospitals, schools, and other mainstream systems need to be able to come in, and we need people to be able to walk up to a front door to make a phone call and refer themselves. So the first thing that happens when you come into our system of care increasingly is a problem solving or diversion conversation. So in our updated figure, that word assess and problem solving are reversed. Again, we want to say, how can I help you solve your homelessness tonight without long-term dependence on the system of care? We are not naive. We know that this will not work for many people experiencing homelessness, but in other communities like Connecticut who have implemented this statewide, they've seen a 75% reduction in families experiencing homelessness through diversion alone. They've been able to close shelters because they've been able to create, to prevent people from coming into the system of care. After a problem-solving conversation, if there isn't a solution available that day, we remind our people we're working with, problem-solving is a continuous resource. We'll have that conversation with you again. For now, let's do a coordinated entry assessment, which was developed locally with the guidance of the local homelessness coordinating board and its various subcommittees to create a system that prioritizes, excuse me, my dog has just entered. She's okay. She wanted to see everybody. Excuse me. So we then begin. So we do an assessment, and somebody receives an answer that is, you are housing referral status, meaning you are considered among the most vulnerable, and we want to make sure we get you access to a housing exit, or you are problem solving status. And again, we go back to that diversion conversation. And this gets refreshed every 6 months for people in our system of care because we know circumstances change. People unfortunately get sicker, or they've been homeless for longer, and they might change their status in our system of care. Based on that housing referral status or problem solving status, people are referred for the right housing intervention, or I should say the available and right housing intervention. Increasingly in our family and youth system, we have a wonderful rapid rehousing program. Thank you to the providers who work on Rising Up and on Heading Home. And then we have the most permanent supportive housing of any community per capita in the country. And we know that it's a valuable resource. Again, there you see housing ladder, ultimately the goal being people being able to be housed on their own. The 5-year strategic framework continues to guide. In fact, when the pandemic became with us and real for us, and as I sat in the interim chair, we asked ourselves, is this still the right strategy? We talked to national folks, we talked to local folks, and we wanted to make sure nobody expected coronavirus, right? And in fact, we knew that we in fact decided it meant we needed to double down on it. Perhaps the definition of vulnerable needed to change based on who was most likely to pass away from the virus, but we wanted our system of care to help divert people out of the system while preserving the scarcest resource for the most vulnerable. During that pandemic, each of the 6 core components operated either by HSH staff or nonprofit providers have not only not stopped and been declared essential services, but they have in some cases accelerated. And this is just really something to be proud of. In many communities, things have just shut down for people experiencing homelessness. And while we still have so much work to do, we really want to acknowledge the work of our frontline workers. It allows us to respond to these dangers. We have strengthened our commitment to equity in the face of the I always struggle with this language because the racial injustice has always been there, but I think we now are experiencing a much more visible version of it for some people. For those of us in this field, housing justice has been part of or the reason we are in the field. But I think nationally, we're at a moment in time where conversations about building equity and housing justice are even more critical. And again, we've continued to serve and provide all of our essential services, which helps us serve more than 13,000 people in our community. We have achieved some of our strategic framework goals. In the formation of the Healthy Streets Operations Center, we helped to create a better, more organized system responding to street homelessness. We were able to functionally end unsheltered family homelessness. This does not mean that a family might not become homeless tonight. It means that we have space in our system of care to shelter them tonight. So if I were to become homeless tonight, there is a space at a shelter. That has maintained during COVID, but we also know that families, there may be more becoming homeless. We're still working on the data around that, but we know that many people don't want to come into shelter because of coronavirus. Many other unsheltered folks tell us they do want to come into shelter, so that being outside feels more dangerous, even understanding the risks of the coronavirus. We have completed a detailed plan to reduce youth homelessness. When the strategic framework was being written, the community was part of a very deep process called YHDP, and we didn't want to publish a goal or a process related to youth that would upend that deep community process. So we worked with that group to set a goal of a 50% reduction in youth homelessness, which is now essentially an addendum to our strategic framework. And as I've talked about pretty extensively, we've designed and implemented, but we are now beginning to improve the coordinated entry system for adults, families, and youth. And at the time, we had ended all large long-term encampments. This is defined as 5 or more tents or individuals. We did that ahead of schedule. We now see the pandemic has really reversed that work, and we're working with partners again in a COVID-safe way to bring people inside. We have a lot of work to do. We need to implement performance accountability across our programs. I want to slow down here for a second and talk about just how important this is to this mayor and this board, and how difficult it is to set system-wide, citywide performance metrics that are based on national best practice, but are relevant and resonate here, and to hold ourselves accountable to it, because everybody's doing good work, but it doesn't mean that they're meeting the metrics. And so we have a lot of work to do here to drive accountability. We set a goal to end family homelessness, to reduce youth homelessness by 50%, and reduce chronic homelessness by 50%. I will stop there, wrapping up again with my gratitude and some support from partners at HUD, noting that you, San Francisco, have shown the country what a compassionate, data-driven public health response to people experiencing homelessness during COVID could be. And you are the most bold in your commitment to rehousing individuals during and post-COVID. I will take that quote. I will pass that to all of the community as the sort of, we have a lot to be proud of, and we will not stop there. We have so very much work to do together. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Director Stewart-Kahn. I also want to recognize Member Miller has joined us, and I'm going to open it up to the committee. If committee members can please raise your, I don't know if it shows up as blue, but raise your hand in the chat area. I'll be able to call on you for questions. All right, so I see Vice Chair D'Antonio.
I'm sorry, I have like a good amount of questions, but I guess a good place for us to start would be just some definitions. So can you define family homelessness for us? Yeah, like the city definition versus your all's definition, if there's a difference.
So the city's definition is, if I understand your question correctly, Vice Chair, excuse me for 1 second, come in. I'm so sorry. This meeting ended up being scheduled while I have a first grade learning pod here. So I was being visited by some 6-year-olds. Since they're apologies, they are trying very hard to respect my time. Vice Chair, I know you're right there with me. So the city's definition of homelessness is HSH's definition of homelessness. What the distinction is there is a HUD definition of homelessness, which is very focused on literal homelessness, unsheltered, living in a shelter. The city's definition, which includes people who are doubled up and living in unstable living conditions. And so So sometimes in our strategic framework, we pivot between a HUD definition and a city definition, and we try to make it clear when we're making that distinction.
So in this presentation, which definition were we using?
That's an excellent question. You mean when we use the city's presentation generally in our strategic framework, and then our modeling is sometimes based, our data modeling, which is now quite blown up by COVID, is sometimes based on a more local, a HUD definition, but generally we defer to the city's definition. The one other caveat is that the school system uses a different way of tracking and a different data system. So we have sort of three challenges or three different ways of defining and navigating family homelessness.
Okay, so I guess to follow up on that, since coordinated entry is mandated federally, when we're talking about coordinated entry family homelessness, are we using the HUD definition, or are we including doubled up families living in SROs?
Thank you.
Things of that nature, yeah.
Thank you for that clarification. In San Francisco, families who are HUD definition, literally homeless, street or living in shelter, are welcome into our family coordinated entry system. Families who are living doubled up and in SROs, and we don't returned again, are also welcome in our family coordinated entry system. What changes is what it might cause in their housing assessment, if that's making sense. So all definitions, San Francisco definition of family homelessness are welcome in family coordinated entry and are part of the implementation, but it plays itself out a little bit in how people get prioritized for services after the assessment.
Okay.
And I'd be happy, Chair or Vice Chair, to provide further documentation of that.
I'm sorry, what did you say, Pam?
Sorry, just when you've done your question, remute yourself so the Abigail's answer is clearer for everyone.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, thank you. So, yeah, I guess as far as prioritization, what happens if you have no prioritization? That was also on my list of questions.
Sure. So I want to make sure we really focus on appropriate language. We rolled out the concept of a priority status. We now use housing referral status because it's important that, and I'm sure this committee would agree, that everybody experiencing homelessness is a priority to this committee, to the city. But we wanted to distinguish between housing referral status and problem solving status. So to specifically answer your question, Vice Chair, if you are not housing referral status, you are problem solving status. And that would mean you would have access to Homeward Bound, to one-time grants that could help you get yourself rehoused, to all of the homeless prevention grants that are available, as well as connection across the city. And you would continue, we hope, connected to the coordinated entry and access point system so that if things changed in your life, your status might change. But one of the things that's super important is that we be really honest with ourselves and with people experiencing homelessness about the resources we do and don't have. In that kind of spaghetti picture, where everybody went everywhere, often they got this answer. They got, "I'm so sorry this is happening to you. I really want you to maintain hope. I'm going to put you on all these wait lists, and we really hope something works out," without a lot of understanding from, let's say you were the case manager working with that person, of what the realities of that were, and certainly less understanding for that person in crisis. And so it was unintentionally not particularly honest. And so as difficult as it is when somebody is not housing referral status, we find that people appreciate the honesty, and it helps us to dig in with them on that diversion conversation.
Okay, sorry. And then I have another follow-up question to that as well. That was also on my list. What does the one-time diversion or the one-time grant, what does that look like? How much is it? And yeah, what does it look like?
Great question. I'd like to come back to you with the specifics because it's a little different for adults, young people, parenting, families, and I don't want to get the numbers incorrect and then have to correct those in a public record. But it's a relatively new process, and much information is available on our website, and we're actually working to kind of improve that area of our website. And then also, as the coronavirus hit, we were adjusting it further. So that's why those numbers are not, I'm not as fluent as I'd like to be in them, and I'd prefer not to get them wrong, but I can offer to get that back via chair or vice chair's direction or controller's office direction about how to provide that in a way that is in alignment.
Thank you. That's great. Sorry, I don't want to monopolize, but I do want to go through the rest of my questions. How often do you guys get feedback from the community, whether it's youth, adults, or families on the coordinated entry process? And how can we find that info publicly?
Specifically on coordinated entry, Vice Chair?
Yes, thank you.
Okay,
on their experiences with coordinated entry, yes.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so let me just give a little bit of framing for that question. So the, as you've noted, because it's a federal mandate, coordinated entry and federally funded in San Francisco, it is governed by the local homelessness coordinating board, which has formed subcommittees which are public and highly attended on each piece of coordinated entry: youth, adults, and families. There are also groups of people experiencing homelessness in each of those categories that provided input into the formation. As a coordinated entry experience, there's, you know, pretty standard kind of satisfaction surveys and updates that happen. And as we begin this CQI process, the intention was to keep going back to those groups and to any new groups we needed to talk to people who'd actually been through coordinated entry, you know, people who'd been housed by it, people who it didn't work for, and to say what worked, what didn't work. One thing we know that's not working is speed. So we're doing very well getting people relatively equitably into the system of care. We have work to do, particularly around trusted relationships with transgender community, and we formed some new partnerships around that. Happy to get into much more of that, but I don't want to take too much of the committee's time. But so we know that people kind of come in the door in a relatively equitable way. We believe that the assessment itself, we believe based on data, based on feedback, not just like our belief and our hope, our actual fact-based belief is that it prioritizes people relatively equitably, or at least proportionally to their experience of homelessness based across various racial groups, for example. But we know that from that moment that somebody is housing referral status, sometimes the speed to housing is too slow based on national best practice and our own metrics. And so that's a place we've gotten a tremendous amount of input, and we've been working for far too long. You'll hear my frustration here, for far too long to speed that process. I am more hopeful this month. Thank you, Noche. She's also hopeful. I'm more hopeful this month about our ability to push through that, having identified, you know, sort of picked up the stones and said, like, what's going on here, and how can we continue to fix this even during a pandemic? And we are not there yet. You didn't ask me what my perspective was on coordinated entry, but I want to make sure that people in community hear that we are wanting to listen to people about this.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, because I know that was part of Obama's recommendation, was that they get 6 months, every 6 months, that we get feedback from the communities who are accessing coordinated entry. And I feel like going into the shelters and the streets and seeing what people's real experiences, especially the things that aren't working, to see how us over here can help fix that, and where the gaps are, would be really important personally to me, I think. And
that's something I'll be sure to bring back to the local homelessness coordinating board as well.
Thank you. And then my last question is just about the Moving On initiative, because I know that's been really successful in San Mateo County. And so I guess you were saying that we're not receiving vouchers anymore through HUD for that. So how does that work now? Are we connecting them to below market rate? Are we connecting them to other affordable housing, to project-based Section 8? What does that look like now, the Moving On?
I think one of the hardest things that happened in the sort of very short history of HSH was the freezing up of the housing vouchers to pair with Moving On, because it was really a remarkably successful program with strong evaluation behind it, and it was changing lives. And it was not only exiting people from permanent supportive housing, but creating more permanent supportive housing through flow. So thanks for acknowledging that other communities have continued to have access, and we're really hoping we get these back online. We're getting good signs from Housing Authority, and so we're hoping that we get these, that we can sort of unpause that quite soon. In the meantime, we've tried to be creative with the larger kind of stepping up or housing ladder. So if we find a building that has better amenities or is in a neighborhood that is not traditionally associated with permanent supportive housing, and it's the one we're bringing on through our pipeline, we will designate that a housing ladder site. And we have one opening up in the next few weeks with many people ready to step up that housing ladder. We are also really looking at, I mentioned the flexible housing subsidy pool, Vice Chair. We're really interested in whether a scattered site approach with a subsidy, but with less resource, supportive service resource, would be a really nice part of a flexible housing subsidy pool. And the early funders of that initiative are very interested in that as well, I believe, as they were early funders and moving on. And so I think we have a lot to kind of work on. So maybe, and you'll hear that I'm a constant optimist, maybe when the Housing Authority turns sort of the pipe back on, we'll have 3 different approaches to a housing ladder in San Francisco.
Great, thank you so much. That was my last question. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Member Friedenbach and then Member Ledbetter. And I just want to remind the committee that we have 30 minutes for this item before moving to our next item. So Member Friedenbach.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for the presentation. Just wanted to, don't really have a question, but just want to kind of circle it back to the legislation or the initiative.
Yep.
So, as we're talking about definitions, we very clearly defined homelessness in the initiative, and it includes people who we typically think about as homeless in terms of being on the streets or living in abandoned buildings or in cars or in shelters. Or in transitional housing programs, et cetera, but it also really specifically lays out for families with minor children. It includes families who are in SROs and families who are doubled up. And so, and that was very intentional. We don't really see much difference between, in our conversations with families who are in shelter where there's a private room for families and the family who's in an SRO, except for the time limit that's superimposed on them in shelters, and in many situations, the families who are in the SROs are in a very worse situation, and the development of their children is significantly delayed because of the unhealthy housing that they're living in, as is the developmental delays that other unhoused families face. And oftentimes doubled up are situations that are very unsafe and frequently involve trading sex for a place to stay, et cetera. And so we really want to try to dissolve those unnatural barriers that we put up in making sure that impoverished families in San Francisco all have safe and decent places to call home. And so I just wanted to mention that. The other part of the definition that's really important for us to remember that kind of came up as you were speaking is that the funds have to go to currently homeless people as we define it. And so housing ladder is not a Prop C allowed expenditure because people who we'd be using that on already have housing. And so I think that there's other funds that could be utilized for housing ladders that that we can try to capitalize in our system, but that would be outside of the our city, our home scope in terms of how the money's spent. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Friedenbach. We'll go to Member Ledbetter.
Thank you, and thank you, Abigail, for that presentation. I also just want to say hello to the public out there. I've also received a lot of interest from the general public, and I know that there is a lot of support from the community to sort of be behind all of us as we do this work. And it's strange as we sit here on Zoom and can't see everybody, but I know you're out there. So thank you for the time that you're spending today with us. I think what we're charged with in part is to create a plan and a plan to end homelessness. And it's very, very helpful to see the basic framework and the programmatic structure through which we're trying to do this in the city. And I really want to help the city of San Francisco to get to a plan that ends homelessness, that looks like really at the data. And so for me, the question is, and what I had sort of hoped to see today, and maybe we'll get to it in our retreat or further, is how are we identifying who's homeless, moving them through this programmatic structure, and ending their homelessness on the other side with whatever touch is required, but really understanding the volume of homelessness and what it takes to end it. What are the costs? What are the costs to the solutions? And so, you know, I had shared with the committee that there are communities out there are doing things like system modeling, which really puts some numbers to this work. And so I hope that we can get there, and it's a big effort to do a system model, but I think that's what I'm aiming for in my mind, because that's the only way we're going to be able to say, what's the problem, what's the need, and what's the gap? And the gap is tremendous. We all know the gap is tremendous. They're not pleasant numbers to look at. They're very difficult numbers to look at when you say what is it actually going to cost to end homelessness. But with Prop C, we have an unprecedented opportunity here, right? So, yeah, I think it would be really great to look at examples. And I think maybe the department did a system modeling exercise a couple of years ago, but maybe
absolutely we did. Yeah,
get public. So it would be lovely to see the initial framework of that, and then see how we begin to plug in. And again, I'll throw out there that Apt Associates has done some really good work in this regard, and we could potentially look at the system modeling tool that they've used for other communities so people get a sense of how that works. And it's, you know, you can't just use a tool, you have to have a community process that designs and, you know, engages, but I think it would be very exciting to start moving in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ledbetter. Thank you so much. And we will be diving into that data during our retreat. But I definitely want to thank Interim Director Stuart Kahn for your presentation and for answering questions. And is there any other comments you want to make before we actually take public comment?
Thank you for that opportunity. I think San Francisco is at just an incredible moment. For those who worked on the passage of this proposition, thank you and congratulations. And to this committee, thank you and congratulations. And you have a tremendous responsibility, and the department joins with you in that responsibility and that mission. And I think to community and people experiencing homelessness, we continue to want to hear from you. We, HSH, I don't speak for this committee, and to continue to evolve to meet needs. And to Member Ledbetter's comment, we absolutely did do a modeling. Some of it is challenged by updated PIT counts, and now data is all over the place with COVID, but we really look forward to, and we were asked at future meetings to bring that forward. And so we look forward to continuing to bring that forward at the guidance of this group. And just really want to say how proud I am to be in San Francisco with a community that aligns its values to take care of the most vulnerable. And thank you all, and thank community for your care about this work.
Thank you. I see Member Najindra has her hand raised.
Yes, and I can, I know we're kind of out of time here and I want to leave time for public comment, but this is more, thank you, Abigail, for the great presentation. And I know that you all are also tracking a lot of data and placements and kind of tracking in. I guess I have questions about whether if you're tracking inflow and what placements you are tracking. I know that you are. You guys have some great dashboards, and I just wanted to know kind of what, for the commission, what would be the most helpful things for us to look at to kind of get a sense for the benchmarks and the tracking that you're already doing, so that we can build off of that to kind of inform our work with your data.
Sorry, were you asking me to weigh in on that, or are you sort of missing that statement?
If there's a place that we should be looking for that, or whether we can ask for that to be brought to the commission in some way.
Great. Yes. So I think what I'd love to do is to take that guidance back and make some recommendations with this committee about the data we should be looking at. For those who want to do homework, we have a huge amount of data available on our new website. A lot of it sits in the local homelessness coordinating board reports, but we also have just general public facing dashboards that give you a sense, but it's just the tip of the iceberg about what we know and have already visualized for data. And we're constantly sort of pulling sources of data and creating new visualizations and tracking. I think inflow is really important. I think nationally, I was actually on the phone with a national reporter about this yesterday. People nationally are having a hard time understanding what COVID is going to do to inflow. So any inflow data we had beforehand, nobody knows if we should rely on it, if we should multiply it by something. It's, there's some research out there, but not a lot. So I think keeping our eyes squarely on inflow and outflow is really important, and would love to think with this group about the kind of data that's relevant to bring here so we don't go into that sort of data overload and therefore get nowhere. What I will hope, and I believe the committee will continue to ask us for, is race equity data related to all of that. So are more people of color becoming homeless because of COVID? Are we placing people equitably in a way that reverses racism? So every time you ask me for data, I'm going to hope you're also asking me for data based on equity.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation. We'll now go to public comment. Or do we have any public commenters?
Members of the public who wish to provide public comment on this item should call 415-655-0001, access code 146-118-8903, then pound and then pound again. If you haven't already done so, please dial *3 to line up to speak. A system prompt will indicate that you have raised your hand. Please wait until the system indicates you have been unmuted and you may begin your comment. Please note you will have 3 minutes. We have a caller on the line.
Welcome, caller.
Hello, my name is Chris Block, and I'm the director of the Chronic Homelessness Initiative at Tipping Point. And I just want to say a couple things. First of all, thank you, Abigail, for the presentation. It was really helpful. Also, thank you to the commission. We are in an exciting place in California. In San Francisco, we can effectively address homelessness over the next couple of years. And we look forward to working with you to do that. One of the things I wanted to offer is that we've worked with both the Department of Homelessness and DPH to do some contracting work with consultants to give us the kind of analysis that's necessary to create the plan that we'll need to effectively address homelessness. And we just want to offer that in partnership with the commission and the department. Just to follow up on something that Julie said, we'd be very interested, for instance, in helping to do some systems modeling so that we can understand what are the subpopulations of homelessness, homeless people, what are the strategies necessary to house those particular subpopulations, and what are the costs of that. And so that we can create a very coordinated and focused strategy for each group of homeless folks with the intent that we'd be able to, in effect, have the right strategy for the right person at the right time, and look forward to working with you all to create that plan and that strategy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there any further public comment?
Checking now. There are no callers on the line.
Thank you. Again, thank you, Interim Director Stuart Kahn, and thank you to our members for your thoughtful questions. We'll continue the conversation and get back to you in terms of data. And just thank you for being here. So we'll now move to item 4, background presentation on San Francisco behavioral health and possible action by the committee in response to the presentation. We have Marlo Simmons, Acting Director of Behavioral Health, here with us. So Director Simmons.
Hi, good morning, everybody. And I appreciate you accommodating the schedule switch, and Abigail, especially appreciate you going first. We have state auditors here this week, digging into everything in BHS. So I had to attend to that. So I am excited to be here. We were really, really pleased with the recent court ruling and kind of moving up what we thought would be a delay and the funds coming to San Francisco. We are very committed to working with this group to realize the intent behind the legislation. And we are also very pleased and, of course, not surprised that mental health and substance use services came out of the legislation as a top priority. And really giving us an opportunity to do better. So I was asked to provide an overview. Oh, and I'm sorry, I'm not even projecting slides. Peg Stevens said that she would be able to project slides. I just want to see if we can still do
Mary,
that.
if you want to pass me the presenter ball, I have her deck up ready.
Great, passing it now.
Thank you. So we can go to the next slide. So I was asked to provide an overview of behavioral health services across DPH and to give an update on some activities we have going on around mental health SF. So we can go to the next slide. So there's a lot of information that we tried to simplify into one slide. So behavioral health services fall across a very broad continuum of care. And if you were to see a full map of all of our services, it would look very much like Abigail's before coordinated entry slide. And so we have a lot of things happening, but they're not always as organized and accessible as we hope that they will be very soon. So we serve about 25,000 clients a year in our mental health and substance use treatment services. We also serve tens of thousands of people in our prevention and early intervention work. Our budget as a whole for behavioral health is about $500 million a year. And our services are delivered by 650 civil service staff and partnerships that we have with community-based organizations. So we contract with about 80 CBOs, and they deliver about 60% of our services. For our substance use services, it's almost exclusively community-based organizations. And so in total, we're looking at about 2/3 of our services are delivered by CBOs. So we cannot talk about our system without acknowledging the importance of our CBO partners. And so in looking at this triangle, it shows the range of services that we offer. So our prevention and early intervention services are really designed to be out in the community, very low threshold, and identifying the earliest signs of behavioral health issues. And so to do this work, we have behavioral health resources invested in childcare programs in schools, in homeless and senior drop-in centers, primary care clinics. Some examples of the work that would be relevant for this committee and the population experiencing homelessness are partnerships with organizations like Larkin Street, Central City Hospitality House, and Curry Senior Center, just to name a couple. And as you move down kind of our continuum of care, we have outpatient and intensive case management programs. That ICM, or intensive case management, is really an anything it takes level of case management. Next, we have residential and crisis programs, followed by the most restrictive and reserved for the highest acuity clients are the locked facilities and hospital stays. Our clients can and do enter our system through a ton of different entry points. And over the years, we acknowledge, and this is one of the things we're very pleased to see in mental health SF and Prop C, is a recognition that our access and flow through the system needs to be improved, that we have a lot of great pieces in place. We do need more services in certain areas, but a lot of our struggle is about getting people to the right door at the right time and helping them to succeed in the program. So overall for BHS, and the other thing that makes our system very complicated is we actually operate 2 managed care plans. So similar to like the San Francisco Health Plan or Kaiser, We run a managed care plan for mental health and one for substance use. They are both intended to serve the Medi-Cal population. And so there are 200,000 Medi-Cal beneficiaries in San Francisco. And if those folks need services that are kind of above what you would get in a primary care setting, they're going to come and get those services through us. And of course, each of those systems have different rules, different privacy, different, how we bill. So integrating those services has not been as easy as we would have liked. We do deliver services as well as purchase them from CBOs, and then we have our health promotion and early intervention system. And thinking about the triangle kind of over the years, as we've had lean budget years, we have really prioritized services that generate revenue. And so that leaves us with a lot of the services in this triangle are Medi-Cal billable services, which are not always the lowest threshold or easiest to access. And so the beauty of Prop C and mental health SF and a lot of the other focus on behavioral health right now is that this is going to provide us with flexible revenue that we have not historically had access to build all of the things we know we need in addition to a Medi-Cal treatment system. There's one last point I wanted to make about our system, and the Revolving Door report had a quote in it that said, "You will hear their suffering, but also their brilliance." And it's talking about the people experiencing homelessness and the challenges that they have accessing the services. And that quote is so powerful, and the hearing their suffering, we hear that frequently. And we know as a system, we have so much room for improvement. And the brilliance piece, to me, goes to one of the values that BHS holds, that is like a wellness and recovery value, that anybody, even people with serious mental illness, can live full and meaningful lives. And so one of the ways that you'll see that showing up in our system is in our peer workforce. So 10 years ago, we had 6 peers employed in our system, and today we have 350 peers. And so people who have come through the system really established their own recovery and are now giving back to the system. And when it comes to engaging hard to engage populations, these staff are magic. And like the brilliance, like, is such a great word for the staff that we have really developed over time. And to see people go from receiving services to delivering supports really has been just an incredible experience. So next slide, please. So while we do have room for improvement in reaching people experiencing homelessness, we do serve a lot of the population already. So this chart shows that, again, between substance use and mental health, we're seeing about 25,000 people a year. There is an overlap between the two systems of clients, that about 2,000 clients that receive services in both. But if you look at the top chart and on the far right, shows the percentage of our clients in fiscal year 18-19 that identified as experiencing homelessness. So we have a large percentage of this population. And I also, a lot of the focus on serving the PEH are, I hope that we don't forget the needs of children and youth. We've done a lot of work in the transitional age youth system of care in behavioral health, but we have a lot of vulnerable children and families that we serve that we also want to keep in mind for all of our system improvements. For our transitional age youth services that we've really spent a lot of time working on over the last few years, we've embedded behavioral health resources in all of the youth access points. We've better integrated behavioral health services across the housing system, especially with Larkin Street. We've also expanded TAY-specific mobile services with Harm Reduction Therapy Center. And so we have some foundation to build from. And then the last thing I wanted to say on this slide is that, again, I think we have a closer relationship with the homeless response system than maybe people realize. because again, our services are not always visible or well marketed, is, if you, as of last year, looking at the 43 agencies that were showing up in the one system, we have contracts with about 16 of those agencies that total about $26 million. So while we have all the improvements, we also have like this rich array of investments that we can leverage in the work that we're doing moving forward. So next slide. So within DPH, in addition to those services that are managed directly by behavioral health services, there are a lot of other services, behavioral health services across the department. So at the hospital at Zuckerberg, we have an inpatient psychiatry unit, psych emergency services, which is something I think this group is well aware of. There is a behavioral health center, which has a locked subacute beds as well as long-term residential program for older adults. We also do outpatient mental health services on the campus. Laguna Honda Hospital has psychiatry and therapy services for the residents. They also do some outpatient services in addition to substance use. And then across ambulatory care, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the other pieces within ambulatory care, we've really worked very hard as a department under the leadership of Hallie Hammer over the last 5 years to build out the behavioral health structure within primary care and other ambulatory care sections. And we also have a transitions team, and we're doing new work to build out whole person integrated care. And I'll touch briefly on that in a minute. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I wanted to highlight some of the work we've done in the last couple of years specific to the communities experiencing homelessness. And the first one is we had one-time funding from the state. We got a couple years ago and it only lasted about 16 months, but it was called the Homeless Mentally Ill Outreach and Treatment Program. And it was a grant from the state, again, one time. And what we did with that funding is we invested in additional peer support services at Hummingbird. We extended the hours of the 6th Street Self-Help Center operated by Central City Hospitality House. We implemented a mobile harm reduction treatment program with the Harm Reduction Therapy Center. And then we worked with UCSF citywide to develop a short-term intensive case management for individuals with a high level of need and really helping them to better connect. A lot of these resources have pivoted to support the work we're doing in the shelter in place. And because this was one-time funding, we're really looking for resources to help continue this. And these services seem so aligned with the mission and intent of Prop C. So the timing of the court case is very hopeful for that, these programs continuing. The shelter in place hotels, which was really kind of an amazing achievement by the city to help 2,000 people move indoors. And of course, BHS has been working to address the behavioral health needs of that population. And so we've done some training with the on-site staff at the hotels in de-escalation, understanding harm reduction. We've implemented a consultation line. So staff on site who see concerns or become concerned about someone living in the hotels can call and have either someone come out or just talk through what they're seeing. We've engaged our peer support universe that I talked about and pulled a lot of our peers into working directly with the guests in the hotels. And they have a warm line, they're doing individual groups in person and using telemedicine or telecare tools. We've also expanded low threshold services, again, with Harm Reduction Therapy Center and SF START to really do on-site support across the hotels. And then similar to what we did with the HMIOT grant, are continuing to have UCSF citywide do that kind of whatever it takes when someone needs a really intensive level of services. And we know from this work and just from years at BHS that when we're talking about supporting clients with behavioral health issues, it's way more than just treatment. right? We need to be helping people get access to housing. We need to help people find work, find meaningful social connections. So there's a quote that I love from one of our clients that they said, as my life got bigger, my illness got smaller. And it really talks about how helping someone to build their life can sometimes be the best medicine. And so when we talk about behavioral health, we just want to be sure we're including things that are beyond traditional treatment services, which are also a very important part of the big picture. Next slide, please. And so many of you are probably familiar with the programs listed here. They represent really across DPH some of the most effective and visible investments that we've made in serving people experiencing homelessness. I won't go into a lot of detail, but street medicine, sobering, the shelter health system, the nursing staff that we have across supported housing sites, medical respite. And we have recently created a new division within ambulatory care that is called Whole Person Integrated Care. We recently, just in the last couple of months, hired Dara Papo, who is managing that division. She came from HSH, and so there's a big opportunity for better alignment with HSH. And that division is managed within ambulatory care by Dr. Hallie Hammer, who I mentioned earlier. And they are both champions of serving this population as holistically as we can and really integrating services. So most of these programs here have behavioral health integrated, but we definitely have opportunities to enrich what's available in these programs, but also be very intentional in building bridges to the treatment system, and then, of course, expanding the treatment system. So next slide. So Tom Waddell Urban Health Clinic, another DPH program with a lot of integrated services with behavioral health. And again, we hope to expand the capacity of this clinic as well as improve the linkages. Next slide. So we have a lot of opportunities as a system to improve. And Joe Wilson from Central City Hospitality House talked about kind of the current reality that we're living in recently. And what he said, and I may not have the quote exactly right, but just that what we're seeing on the streets today is this collision of racism and poverty and a global pandemic. And it's like playing out on the streets for the whole world to see. And it's really driving an awareness of the failures of our system and driving a louder call for help and for improvements than we've ever heard. And now we have all of that plus this incredible amount of resources to bring all together. And there are a lot of ways that we know that we can do better. And just, a couple examples, in 1819, we discharged 27 clients a week on average from residential treatment back to homelessness. And we have a lot of clients, like 7,000 clients a year that get discharged from psych emergency services. And 40% of those get discharged without connection to care. And we know in the last 8 months that we've had 450 overdose deaths in San Francisco. So there is not a question about the critical level of the need. And now having these resources available, I hope that you guys can join in some of the hope for our system to improve. And so some of the opportunities we have is that in thinking about behavioral health services across the homeless response system, we have learned that we really need to better support the frontline staff in those programs, because at the end of the day, they are the front line. They're the first ones that are going to see the clients, the first ones that know there's an issue. So training them to understand how to really address behavioral health issues, interact with clients that have them, and understanding when to call for help and how. We need to work on. We need better outreach and marketing to educate the community about our services. We have a lot of things that people just don't even know exist. And that, again, that navigation and better care coordination, we do need services but we also need like the glue that holds it all together. And we know that there are specific access to barrier issues or barriers to care that we need to address. And we know that we need more treatment beds, intensive case management slots, and SUD services from prevention through treatment. And the street crisis response work that we're doing, we hope will address some of the challenges of street crisis that we're seeing. Next slide, please. So there has been, over the last few years, again, this growing interest in better meeting the needs of this population. And so we've had great work happening under the mayor's leadership with mental health reform and the work of Dr. Anton Nagusa-Bland and his team. We now have mental health SF legislation that's come out and provided really a great framework for much of this work. We also, for behavioral health services, have been working on a lot of these improvements over the years. And so now we take all of this work and merge it together with Prop C, and we have this common set of priorities, which gives me hope that this merging can be done successfully. We know the target population. We know we need to increase access points, the hours that services are available, improve care coordination, and again, really up our game around harm reduction. Next slide. So I'll talk now about mental health SF and some of the things we're doing in that area. So again, new legislation passed unanimously by the board and the mayor in December. COVID hit, and so now we're really getting back to it. The target population for mental health SF specifically calls out adults experiencing homelessness that have mental health and substance use issues. It also talks about improving the system for all Medi-Cal clients. So improving services for this population will benefit every other person served in our system. The legislation really wants for our services to be more mobile, meeting people where they are, make it easier to access services, provide more locations from respite to treatment, just more capacity, and again, improving the care coordination. So it's a really great vision spelled out in mental health SF. And there obviously is profound alignment with Prop C and what the legislation set out to do. Next slide, please. And so for DPH, the way we've organized our planning structure internally is very similar to how we did our project management for the EPIC rollout, which is our new electronic health record being spread across the department. We need strong project management support, and we're also getting a lot of support internally from our data and IT partners. HR hiring is a huge issue for our system right now. A workforce pipeline, and of course our equity work needs to be embedded in all of this. So the 5 main areas, and I'll talk a little bit about a couple of these, is the Office of Coordinated Care, which legislation spells out, street crisis teams, the Mental Health Service Center, new beds and facilities, and the implementation working group, which is a body similar to this committee to oversee and help advise around the mental health SF implementation. We also have a new director for behavioral health services. So the position that I'm currently sitting in is going to be moving out of ambulatory care and higher up in the org chart, and will be reporting directly to Dr. Grant Colfax and Roland Pickens, who's the director of our San Francisco Health Network, where BHS lives. And then we will be starting our own, again, that implementation working group sometime, we're aiming for December. So hopefully that date will be set very soon. Next slide. So we know we have some things that we need to happen in order for us to be successful. Again, this project management support, we are estimating that there are about 50 new civil service positions that we'll be hiring, many more resources going into contracts, but we do need to invest in a lot of staff to make all of this happen. And we're also trying to fill a current about 90 vacancies across BHS. We have some foundational improvements to our data systems we need to make to really show our progress and outcomes. And then we have to closely collaborate with community groups. There are so many people invested in behavioral health improving, that we need everyone to kind of be working towards the same vision. And there's so much alignment that I'm not really concerned that that will happen. And then finding space, real estate continues to be a problem in San Francisco. A little bit better with COVID, but still a challenge. Next slide, please. So the Office of Coordinated Care, again, a foundational big piece of mental health SF. And I'm not going to go into the information on the right for the slides I have coming up, but we're really just wanting to show that we are starting to think about implementation, coming up with very specific plans, timelines, phases, deliverables. So there'll be more information on that. But I just wanted today to talk a little bit about what the Office of Coordinated Care is. One of the goals is that we would start to see linkage and coordination across DPH and really the city when it comes to behavioral health. So, even the private hospitals and everything BHS serves need to be better connected. We know that we need to let the community know more about our services. Again, we need to better train our staff and our partners. Consultation and linkage. In addition to the people experiencing homelessness, Mental Health SF is very concerned also about better linking people coming out of jail to services, increase the availability of case management across the board. And that's something that I know is important to this committee. And we're really looking at kind of that critical care management level of services that are very, very intense, usually shorter term to help engage people, kind of the friendly stalking approach to get people engaged in care. Intensive case management, again, is that anything it takes level of care, but could be ongoing for a couple of years. And then we need more case management capacity in our outpatient programs so we can take more clients and meet their needs more successfully than just expecting people to show up to appointments. And then the data collection and evaluation across the board. So the Office of Coordinated Care is really the driving engine behind the implementation of mental health SF and many of the priorities of this committee. Next slide. So this is one of the pieces of the work for this year that is ahead of the curve on the timing. So we have been working on street crisis response teams, and there are about 21,000 calls a year that the police label as for responding to a mentally disturbed person, which obviously is not an ideal term, but that's just the coding for the calls. But what we want is we don't want the police to be the ones responding to mental health crisis on the street. We want our new teams that we're building to be the ones to respond. So these new teams are made up of a paramedic from the EMS6 team, a behavioral health clinician, and a peer. So it's similar to the Cahoots model in Eugene, Oregon, and a little bit expanded. And those teams, and I think, so they'll be doing crisis intervention on the street. And then we have that connection to the Office of Coordinated Care. So people who are like cycling in crisis, we're going to have a place to help them connect. And that the Office of Coordinated Care can send people out and do really intensive outreach. Next slide, please. And so what this shows, the graphic is our timeline for the rollout of these teams. We are hoping to have the new team, the first team live by the end of November. And then you'll see that before the end of the fiscal year, we're hoping to have 6 teams and then even growing beyond that. And I talked a little bit about the teams already. As far as the coverage, we're really wanting to be very data-driven. And so based on the calls that are coming into 911 currently, where are those calls coming from? What time are they coming? And so the teams will be deployed in a really data-driven way. We will have 12-hour coverage 7 days a week. The exact hours we're still working out. And then hopefully by the end of the year, we will have 24/7 coverage if that is, something that we need. And then the street crisis response teams will be responding to those calls very soon. And we have continuing goal to get input from people. One thing we are aware of is that we see a lower number of 911 calls coming from the southeast sector of the city. which we're not surprised by, but we want to pay really close attention because as these services become more visible to the community, we want to understand if that number will increase, or if 911 as an entry point is a problem just because of trust and concerns. A lot of people don't want to call the police when someone's in a mental health crisis. So that's one of the issues that we're starting to talk through. Next slide. So the Mental Health Service Center really seeks, and again, this is one of the pieces of the Mental Health SF, seeks to provide more low threshold access to services. The legislation is specific in saying that they want staff, city staff or an academic institution staff to operate the program in a city building, one or more buildings. And so the goal is to have 24/7 access to mental health and substance use assessment, diagnosis, case management, treatment, really quick access to urgent care if needed, pharmacy, psychiatry services, and that we're helping with transportation to get to and from the site. There are a lot of things we want to take into account and really look at data and work with our partners about what this program should look like. So we're very excited that the implementation working group for mental health SF, one of the first things they're going to really get into is going to be how the design of this program. So we'll hopefully have more information soon. Next slide, and I only have a couple more slides. We acknowledge that there is a need for new beds and facilities. And so we know that across the continuum, there are particular places where we have bottlenecks. And so people who are sitting in hospitals or sitting in jail simply because there is not a bed to place them in. And so that has to stop. And so again, the connection between Prop C and this goal is so clear. We know, and we have funding in this year's budget to do more locked beds, residential care facilities, mental health residential treatment. And then we are also going to be exploring how we can do a new drug sobering center. The plans that we were hatching for a meth sobering center kind of dissolved with COVID. So we want to come back to that service model. The Hummingbird program has been successful. We're working to open a second Hummingbird. And then we know our crisis response teams that are going to be on the streets are going to need places to bring people. And the services we have now, we need to improve access, but we also need more. And so having the crisis diversion program, a new one to expand capacity is a goal. And then a lot of this work is based on an analysis that Dr. Bland and the mental health reform team did, and analyzing kind of the bed flow. And we want to redo this every year so we can continually be sure we're building the system based on what we're seeing in the data. Next and last slide is, again, looking right ahead of us. The next 6 months are going to be really focused on foundational infrastructure development so that we can get this work done. And really the hiring is one of our top priorities. And then really developing strong collaboration with other city initiatives. And the Prop C committee obviously is key in this, but there are also efforts happening like alternatives to policing and redirecting funds from the police department, that those groups have the same goals, right? They want to see equity. They are also concerned about how racism impacts the community, better information, quicker access. So there is this alignment in all of these things that will help drive the improvements for behavioral health. And then the vision that came out of the mental health reform work is something that we are very committed to. And I just wanted to close with this kind of recommitting to this, is that people experiencing homelessness should have low barrier access to welcoming, high quality behavioral health care that matches their needs. And our system really needs to be grounded in evidence-based practices that reduces harm, increases recovery, and is suited to efficiently deliver behavioral health services to people experiencing homelessness. And these visions really extend to everybody in our system. So that is the end of my presentation. The next slide is just a thank you slide, and I'm happy to field questions or go wherever the group wants to go.
Thank you so much, Director Simmons. I also want to recognize Supervisor Ronan is here with us. I know we're at time for this item, but Supervisor Ronan, did you want to make any remarks in regards to mental health SF?
Just trying to unmute. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much. No, I wanted to be here to answer questions. And my understanding from our last, or for your last meeting, was that you were interested in understanding how the investments made in mental health SF, exactly where they were going. And I had asked DPH to present that to you today, because in addition to understanding how the program works, understanding how the investments go to support that program was my understanding of what you wanted to hear. I'm really just here to answer any questions you might have.
And Supervisor, we did bring our fiscal leadership team is here. So Greg Wagner and Jenny Louie. So if there were questions about that, we can field them. When we talked with you about that need to really get into the budget detail, we had already passed the submission for formal information submission, but we're prepared to talk a little bit about that today.
Thank you so much. I want to invite if there's any committee members that have questions for the staff. I do not see any.
I do, but I can't, I'm not sure where to hit my request. Is there a thing?
Yes, it's under participants, and actually there is a stack that I see now. So I have Vice Chair D'Antonio, Member Najindra, and then Member Friedenbach, and then Member Reggio.
Got it.
I started last time, so I want to let someone else start this time, just to like be democratic. But yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we'll go to Member Najindra.
Thank you. Thank you, Marlo, for that great presentation. It was really helpful. And I know there was a lot that you had to pack in there, so I really appreciate your helping us understand all of the different programs and how they fit together. And one of the things I heard you say that I'm sure if you had more time, would love to dig into is, how you're all the different ways you want to improve behavioral health access and outcomes for people experiencing homelessness. And one of the things I was wondering about that you also mentioned was sort of better coordination with the homeless and housing system. And so I was curious kind of if there are ways that I have to imagine that your outcomes, your behavioral health outcomes for your clients improve once they're in housing. And I assume that one of the things that you probably are looking to do is have better discharge planning for people not back into the streets, but back into housing. And so I'm kind of curious if you track housing placements for your clients, and you could say a little bit more about if you have plans, or it sounds like you're working well with the hotel programs right now, and kind of where the coordination is, and what you kind of wish for you had in terms of housing resources for your clients.
Yeah, I mean, the housing and Abigail's presentation really talked about that, is that we just need more housing across the city. And so this work is very hopeful for us, and we don't really provide housing. And so because HSH is the holder of the housing resources, we need to be really working very actively with them to be sure, again, that we are providing that support and training for the staff in the housing response system, that we are integrating as many on-site services as we can, and then better linking from housing programs into our system. And that includes things like if somebody leaves a placement for residential treatment, that we're coordinating so they have their placement to go back to. So there's so many opportunities for us to improve. We have done over the last 3 years around transitional age youth. I've done a very active collaboration with HSH and have really embedded a lot of things that are working very well that we want to expand across the system. And HSH is incredibly open to the partnership, and we've strengthened it during COVID, but it's just collaboration, like continually we have to focus on it. The there was a few points in your question. Help me again, I'm sorry.
You're muted.
Sorry. Do you track housing placements for your students, sort of have an idea of what your discharge outcomes are?
Right. So we do know for a lot of programs something about when people are discharged. So again, that number I quoted, that in 1819, we had about 27 people on average a week discharged to the street. But there definitely are opportunities to improve our data collection, which again, it's like, that's one of the things that may not be like really sexy for people to talk about because they really want new services, but we need those like data systems and the staff training, we need staff to run the data systems. So that's what I'm talking about, the foundational work. So we do track some stuff. We need to do a much better job being more accurate and building in a lot of quality improvement work. And then one of our challenges is that a lot of our low threshold programs, so like Central City Hospitality House, doesn't use our electronic health record. And so they do a lot of amazing work. We fund them, a significant portion of their budget, but that data of what they do and what their impact is isn't showing up. So a lot of work, but we do try to track some stuff.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to contextualize my comments and then I'll be done. But I think we're with the Proposition C funds, I think we're trying to figure out how to gear, all of the different activities happening in the city towards getting more people housed and sort of trying to figure out how all those pieces fit together. So thank you for your answer. I appreciate it.
And the other thing, I'm sorry, the last point is that it's not just our services aren't just needing to be expanded for people who are actively experiencing homelessness or unsheltered, but how we are present in all supported housing sites. So we are preventing homelessness. Again, that's a lot of the training for the frontline staff, is that they're, again, the first ones that are going to see, oh, I'm concerned. There's something happening here, and we don't want it to escalate to an eviction. Then that person's on the street, they become a crisis, and then we catch them. We need to go much higher upstream.
Great, thank you. We'll go to Member Friedenbach.
Hi, thanks so much, Director Simmons, for the presentation and in particular for really identifying some of the challenges that we're facing in the behavioral health system. That's really what we need. I've got some specific requests. We need a breakdown, and this is part of our, we need to certify spending, we need to get details. But in the last presentation, $66 million was programmed for mental health SF, and we need a breakdown of exactly what you guys are thinking about using that $66 million for, so that we can look at it and see if it fits in or doesn't fit in with kind of the vision. You mentioned some grants. I think there was 4 items there. We need a cost of each item. We need the number of people served and the outcomes, the housing status of the people, and whether that funding request is one time or ongoing. And then what has been of great concern to a lot of us is the loss of boarding care facilities, and we would appreciate getting the exact cost of purchasing the boarding care facilities that are on the market. The cost of there's for example that large 2-building boarding care facility on Shotwell that was recently bought by a developer. Perhaps there's an opening to buy that back and get that back for folks. I noticed there's still some people living in that building, and other opportunities in terms of boarding care facilities. I'd also like to see the costs of the co-ops and a cost analysis of how much it would cost to expand the co-op housing for behavioral health. Again, number of people served and how we could possibly do that. This is, we need to get these kinds of details, I think, for us to be able to sort of move forward here. And thank you so much again. Really appreciate all the work you all are doing.
So So we do have many of those details. I'll probably follow up with you offline to be sure I'm getting all of the details that you want. On the budget front, again, and I don't know if we have time or even can go through materials we haven't submitted, but the new beds, expanding the per unit cost, or how much we're able to reimburse for the board and cares, intensive case management slots, new lower threshold SUD services. So there are a lot of things that are within the Prop C that are what that 66 million is making up, but we need to get you the details. So we will do that, but the alignment is there. And Supervisor Ronan's been super clear in the need for us to be mindful of the legislation.
Yeah, no, it's just that, mental health SF, we were trying to get ahead with mental health SF. We already won Prop C. We knew the funding was coming. The idea is to bring stuff forward and not just keep going backwards in time. So when mental health SF was being proposed, we had already won Prop C, and we knew we were going to, we were really confident we're going to win the court case. So the idea was to move forward on it, and there was other initiatives that were going to the ballot to pay for that, and maybe we want to use Prop C money for it, maybe we don't. But I think we need to have a big picture. Mental health SF encompasses a lot. And there's a lot of, this is like a, real radical, restructuring in a lot of ways of the whole mental health system. And I think even within that, we as a committee need to weigh in on what the priorities are, because it's, boarding care facility. A big part of mental health SF was increasing the bed capacity and all of this stuff. And we need to be able to look at things and then make recommendations. Of course, you guys can decide differently, but us as a committee need to make clean recommendations of this is what our priority is for behavioral health. And I can't imagine anything that we would recommend, honestly, that wouldn't even fit into mental health SF, because mental health SF was such a huge, just change up of the whole system, and really focusing in on making sure people got the care that they needed. And so I agree, there is absolutely a lot of alignment, but we still need to weigh in as a body on what the priorities are. And we need to know what, and it may be that the priorities you guys are identifying are this group's priorities, but there needs to be transparency so that
If I could, Madam Chair, just very briefly, it's Ben Rosenfield from the Controller's Office. In talking about the structure of this meeting and the next couple of meetings, it felt important to us to bring forward some of the foundational documents for this meeting, strategic plans, overviews of recent work, and the rest. And then our hope was to begin bringing more specific details back at the next meeting and beyond. We didn't want to put cart before horse. And so the questions and feedback are super helpful, and it'll help us formulate how we work with public health to bring details back for the next meeting.
Thank you so much. We'll go to Member Reggio.
Really sorry to interrupt. I'm just, I had requested that those details be at this meeting, Member Friedenbach. So I'm a little frustrated because that's why I'm here, to be able to, I don't need to be here to answer. So I'm missing my Transportation Authority meeting to be here. So I'm going to leave now. I do have to say it would be nice if DPH could be clearer. I knew that's what this committee wanted, and I asked you to bring it to this committee, and you didn't do that. And so now I've been here for no reason, because I've seen that presentation several times missing other work. So if we could have clearer communication in the future, I would appreciate that. I'm a little frustrated at the moment, but I appreciate you all, and I will be here, I guess, the next meeting when we go over the financial data, that it was clear as day to me that that's what this committee requested last time around. So I don't know, I'm frustrated. But I will see you next time, I guess, and miss my meeting again next time.
Thank you, Supervisor Ronan, for making time to join us today, and thank you.
Thanks, Supervisor.
Thank you. We'll go to Member Reggio. You're muted, sorry.
Is it on?
Yes.
Good. So Actually, I was going to ask exactly the same thing we got at the beginning. I think it's going to be very helpful to see not only the assumption regarding what Prop C funds might be involved in paying for this, but what the big budget is on that. So we see how our piece of the responsibility fits into it. So I also look forward to seeing the funding, and again, not only the 66, I think it's 66,000, whatever the million, whatever that was, but the overall budget for it. And I also want to say I appreciate the presentation very much. Marla, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We'll go to Vice Chair D'Antonio.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. Jenny and Ken both touched on some things that I had written down. I did kind of just want to shout out, and not to like stir the pot, but during the agenda setting, we were told that those numbers, like that they didn't have them. So I think that amongst everyone here, there's some miscommunication. And I just really, in the name of transparency, hope that we can all be really transparent and honest with each other from here on out. So that's one thing. And second, I just had some more questions. So Marlo, what is the definition of homelessness for families that you all are using when you're using the definition of homelessness? Is it the HUD definition or is it the city's definition? Will doubled up families and SRO families have access to these funds under the homelessness fee?
Yeah, for behavioral health, right, because we're not gatekeeping access to specific housing units, we use a very broad term. And so it's really people who are at risk of experiencing homelessness, actively, couch surfing. So we include a very broad set of definitions when we talk about people experiencing homelessness. And a lot of our data is just self-report. And so
that's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you. I think that's important. I also wanted to shout out the 350 peers that were hired, because I think that's really awesome. And I just hope that we can do that in all of our programs, especially like in our homeless and housing services. And just around hiring, like another, sorry, my daughter's over here making herself some food. Was just around like the difficulty that HSH has had around hiring folks. And it sounds like you all are too, like still having a difficult time hiring folks. And then we're going to create all these new positions. And it seems, and I might be wrong on this, but the budget like rolls over for HSH, like it just turns into money that they didn't use. And so I just want to see what the plans are. Maybe we don't have to answer this right now, but what are the plans for hiring? Like, how are you going to mitigate that? Like, what is going to happen to those funds if they don't get used, if we don't hire people? Like, what is going to happen to these these ideas of these programs, like if we don't hire the right people, like we don't get the right people on board? So I don't know if you have an answer to that, or if you want to just like think about that for the future meeting, but.
Yeah, we have a lot of things in place that we're working on to improve the hiring speed for the civil service jobs, right? And then the CBOs are going to have a big part in all of this as well. And they don't have quite the challenges in hiring that we do. Greg, are you still on? I was going to see if Greg could answer your question about the rollover, and then also just maybe make a comment about the like the transparency. That my understanding is that we absolutely, I mean, like we have spreadsheets we're ready to share. There's some confusion apparently about what the focus of this agenda was. So Greg, I don't know if you can speak to that on behalf of.
Hi everybody, Greg Wagner, Department of Public Health. And we'll send around some documents that have some of the financials and talk about them. But to your question specifically, the way that these funds, because of the nature of the proposition, and the Controller's Office can weigh in on this too, but those funds would be held in a special account so that at the end of the year, unlike when they're general fund dollars and they fall back to, if they're unused, they fall back to general fund balance. These funds are separated and would continue to be used for the purposes approved in the measure. So it's a little bit different than some of those other situations. And overall, even in cases where we have funds that are unused at the end of the year, we often have those earmarked or held against a contract, which allows them to carry forward. So we're very attuned to that. So we can talk about that in more detail with you. Again, on the larger budget numbers, we have that data. We are prepared to discuss it, and I'm sorry if we missed the opportunity today.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and when you guys send that out, if we could get a breakdown of how much will be administrative expenses, only because Prop C, only 3% of the funds are supposed to go to administrative expenses, and a lot of the things that it sounds like MHSF are trying to do are admin expenses, and we really want to see tangible things for the homeless community over administrative. Like, I understand the purpose of administrative things, that you need them to roll out the programs, but we just really want to make sure that only no more than 3%. And that would be like how that actually breaks down. Like, it wouldn't be 3% of MHSF, it would be 3% of Prop C. So like it would actually have to be less, because we still need the administrative funds for like the other Prop C things as well. So if you guys could break that down for us as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
I actually have another question, but I didn't know if Greg wanted to answer my admin, but it was more of a comment. Okay, and then Marla, just 2 more questions for you. What does SUD stand for when you say SUD services?
Within the Medi-Cal program, SUD is substance use disorder.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question is around TAY. So, you know, there's a big fear of CPS within our TAY youth. So what are you doing to develop trust with TAY homeless youth? And then also, if we could get an age breakdown, and also race would also be great, of the TAY youth that is being served with this fund, or that has been like successfully served. So thank you.
So yeah, and all of the specific requests for data or information, there's a lot of detail, and I want to be sure we get it right. So if there's any way we could from the committee get like a central, like, here's a list of all the stuff we want from BHS, that would really help give better information. Transitional age youth are 16 to 24-year-olds. You know, it's really kind of that transition from child to adult, where we see a lot of young people get lost to the system. And we've done a lot of work over the last 3 years to build out those services. Did you say specifically CPS, like Child Protective Services, or?
Yeah, because like I was a TAY homeless unaccompanied youth. So I know personally from 16 until I turned 18, there's no way I'm touching any system. So like, what are we doing around that? Because if like a 16 to 18-year-old tells a therapist or somebody like that they're homeless, that's a red flag. So like, what, I mean, I don't even know if there's a way to address that, but if we're targeting 16 and 18-year-olds, like, unless they're emancipated youth, but there's a lot of nuance there. And I just, and I think that if the earlier we catch like homeless TAY youth, like the more impactful we can be on their lives, and the less, yeah. So I just want to make sure that that's something we're thinking about, because I think a lot of those nuances sometimes, like, unless you've been through the system, it's not things you think about.
Yeah, and we've, we have a lot of different things happening with transitional age youth, and it probably would be even, I'd be happy to share some of that with you offline in more detail. That is a complicated issue, but we do have, you know, very deep partnerships with the Homeless Youth Alliance, Larkin Street, and so a lot of the organizations that are out and actively on the street, and I would say that they are more equipped maybe than our adult serving systems in being sensitive to those issues. And, you know, we also have resources at the coordinated entry access point. So I'd love to talk with you more offline. It seems like a very complicated issue. I want to think through a little more.
And I think one of the big issues, as having been a shelter client advocate, is that there is kind of a monopoly of services under Larkin Street. And so that's something I would want to think about when distributing the funds, is there's no one size fits all, and not all youth feel comfortable with Larkin Street. And a lot of youth like end up getting denied services through Larkin Street, and then it becomes difficult for them to access anything. So like, what does that look like? And making sure that there's like an equitable distribution with the money to different programs.
Yeah, and Director Simmons will be sending all these data requests, same to HSH, and I think we'll reach out to all the committee members to get a list of those requests and try to have that in advance of our meeting and our retreat for us to review. So I definitely want to thank you for your time, Director Simmons, and I do, looking at the time, is there any members that that need to leave the meeting or can stay with us to continue on in the agenda? I just want to make sure we don't lose quorum because I know it's 11:40. Is there anyone? Okay, Member Reggio?
Yeah, I would need to leave by 12:30, but I also think we have, it seems to me there's at least one other very substantial presentation.
Yes, that's what I'm checking. We have two, actually.
Do we? So, yeah, I think it would be counterproductive to go too long on this, and I wonder what, if one of those presentations might be saved for the retreat.
That's what I was going to recommend. And I'm going to look to Member Friedenbach. Would you prefer us to, because I know this is a really great presentation and really important information that we want to have time to really dive into. Would you want to go into your presentation today, or would you like to move this to the retreat?
Well, I think if the presenters are, I think the original plan was to do like a brief overview, and they have been waiting on the call for quite a while. So I feel like if they're cool with doing it, then we should go ahead and do the brief. And then if we want to do a more deeper dive in the, later, we can arrange that.
Absolutely. I'm actually going to recommend for item 7 for our staff, if we can move that to our next meeting, because I know we already had sort of an overview on this. So if we could actually table item 7, is there any objections to tabling item 7? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to public comment at this time. Is there any public comment?
Member of the public. Chair, I just have one. I had my hand raised, and I just want to make one comment. It's okay. I think I left it raised for quite a while before that, so it might have been unnoticed. It just strikes me that this committee is going to have a very difficult time making recommendations we can stand behind if the departments aren't bringing together with the controller's office and the robust infrastructure we have for planning, if they're unable to bring a right-sized system to us. Like, we need to understand what is right-sized for behavioral health program, what is right-sized for the homeless service system. And by right-sized, I mean, what is the need? Are our strategies funded at the adequate level to get to the goal, which is either housing or wellness for our communities, right? And so that planning work really needs to be brought to us, I think, in a much more robust way so that we can make recommendations that are cross-system recommendations. And again, I'm very willing to participate in anything required to get to that planning. I know it's super complex, but as I'm hearing this, there's similar challenges, right? Like, I'm concerned that both of our systems might be over investing in outreach and under investing in the higher levels of care, whether that be psychiatric services on the behavioral health side or housing on the housing side, or medically assisted treatment on the behavioral health side. So we can put armies of people on the streets and not necessarily end people's housing. So that's to me what's at stake here for the right sizing question, and it's going to be really difficult for us to make recommendations without taking planning from that approach. So I'm very excited about all the improvements listed here. Thank you, Marlo, really appreciate it. And I can look at the identified improvements and be thrilled, knowing that we need ICM out there, knowing that we need all of these pieces. I just need to sort of see it in a plan that makes sense, right?
Thank you. Thank you, Member Ledbetter. We'll go to public comment at this time. Is there any public comment?
Member of the public who wish to provide public comment on this item should call 415-655-0001. Access code 146-118-8903. Then pound and then pound again. If you haven't already done so, please dial *3 to line up to speak. A system prompt will indicate you have raised your hand. Please wait until the system indicates you have been unmuted and you may begin your comments. Please note that you will have 3 minutes. Checking now. There are no callers for public comment.
Thank you. Is there any additional comments from committee members on this item before moving into item 6? All right, seeing none, I just want to thank Director Simmons again for joining us and for providing that information. We have a lot to think about, but thank you so much for your presentation and your time, and to all your staff as well. So we'll now move into item 6, presentation on the Coalition on Homelessness, Stop the Revolving Door report, summary and possible action by committee in response to the presentation. So I'll turn it over to Member Friedenbach and her colleagues.
I'm actually not the one presenting. It goes to Chris Herring, I believe.
Okay, they didn't have the name listed. So, okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm Chris Herring. I'm a fellow at Harvard University's Inequality in America Institute and assistant professor of sociology at UCLA. I'll be presenting findings from with my colleague Cesar and Tracy, who are also on this call. I'm going to now share my screen for the and get up our slides. Okay, can everyone see the slideshow? Great. All right, so the report, which is nearly 100 pages, so we're just going to be highlighting a few of the key findings today, but I encourage you all to look online. We're just going to briefly touch on each section of the report. I'll go over the methodology and then hand it over to Tracy, who will talk about prevention. And then we'll discuss shelter, substance use treatment, and mental health treatment, which are all the key sections of the Prop C funding, and conclude with some specific findings about transgender homelessness. So our study utilized the community-based participatory action approach to research, which simply means that the community in which our research took place was involved and centered every step of the research with the community. And we were guided by subject matter experts from universities around the Bay, including UC Berkeley, SF State, Santa Clara University. And while they helped us create the methodology and the survey tools, we had a wide range of groups craft and revise our survey instrument, including various agencies like the Department of Public Health and the Homeless Department, as well as community groups and service providers. We hired a team of around a dozen people, all who had lived experiences with homelessness, who actually proctored the surveys, and some who were even homeless at the time of the study. And 2 of those peer researchers are with us today. They carried out more than 500 surveys across the entire city, and also conducted 25 in-depth focus groups. We had a representative sample that closely matched the 2019 point in time count. I can go into this in more detail, but as you can see, we were really matched onto the race, gender, and sexual orientation of the point in time count. About half of those we spoke with were primarily staying outside, while the other half were in some forms of shelter, which is a little off from the point in time count, but close. And age was largely representative. We slightly over sampled those who were older than were younger, but overall representative. And with that, I'll now hand it over to Tracy, who, if we can unmute her, I believe she's an attendee, will present our findings about prevention.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. A key part of Prop C is funding to keep people housed in the first place. And our survey began asking a number of questions about how people became homeless and what steps would have helped prevent this. Excuse me. One surprising finding was that 51% did not have a lease the last time they were housed, pointing to the precarity of many of those just before becoming homeless, and also the limits of tenant protections that we fight so hard for in San Francisco. Next slide, please. When asked all of the reasons people became homeless, The primary reason reported by 43% of participants was that they lost their housing because it was no longer affordable. As you can see in the breakdown, this was due nearly just as often as income simply being too low as it was due to a loss of a job. Next slide, please. When asked what type of housing people were in immediately before their current experience of homelessness, we found that a disproportionate number had been in some sort of government supported or affordable housing, such as supportive housing, below market rate housing, and public housing. We found that 13% of those surveyed, more than 1 of 10 of those currently homeless, had been in the city's permanent supportive housing immediately before becoming homeless. A separate question asked survey participants if they had ever been in permanent supportive housing, and 1 in 6, or 18% of participants, reported previously that they had been in permanent supportive housing at some point. This finding is in line with the 2015 study by the Budget Legislative Analysts, which found that after 3 years, 47% of permanent supportive housing residents had left their housing. In sum, permanent supportive housing as it currently exists plays a significant role in the revolving door in and out of homelessness. Next slide, please. So as far as policy recommendations, first, when asked what interventions would have prevented their homelessness, rental assistance was reported as having been the most helpful. Nearly 1/3, or 32% of survey participants who answered this question reported that the rental assistance would have prevented them from losing their housing. Interestingly, 78% of those who said that they needed rental assistance would have only needed it for 1 year or less. The fact that the survey found that many of those experiencing homelessness were not on the lease points to the limits of preventing homelessness only through tenant protection measures and the need for cash rental assistance. The finding that the primary reason people had become homeless because rent was no longer affordable also supports the primacy of this intervention, of this policy intervention. Next slide, please. Focus group participants discussed the needs for more services and supports, such as payee programs, direct rent payment, and case management to ensure that people who enter can remain housed without returning to homelessness. They also felt that autonomy really matters. Respondents ranked basic essentials, including access to one's own bathroom and kitchen, above even their own safety when asked about important factors they were looking for in housing. Our finding that 1 in 6 of those currently homeless in San Francisco have already been in supportive housing shows that our homeless housing programs are also part of the revolving door in and out of homelessness. So while we need to increase the number of supportive housing units, we also need to improve their quality. Furthermore, city agencies and housing providers do not accurately capture why it is people are leaving this housing. This needs to be remediated. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Chris to talk about shelter.
Thanks, Tracy. All right, so I'm going to talk about shelter, and the majority of survey respondents currently residing outside either regularly use shelter when it is available or have tried to access shelter and had been rejected. And so although our point in time numbers, show the split, which the majority of those are currently staying outside, I think this is really significant to show that many of those outside have or do use shelter when they can. In addition, San Francisco shelters present the barriers of access to many survey respondents. And so when we asked folks who had used shelter in the past 5 years why it is they weren't able to access, we received the following answers. The main response being that no beds were available or long waits. Now, the primary barrier to shelters to those who have not used shelter ever in the past 5 years was the bad reputation or a bad experience in the past that had been more than 5 years or longer. And so these are barriers that we will need to address in our shelters. We found a real demand for the diversity in the system. We found that there was almost equal demand for both a clean and sober shelter, as well as a shelter that would allow those actively using drugs and alcohol to safely use on site. We also asked participants if the city had a legal free campsite where you could camp outside in your private tent and have access to toilet, showers, and have some basic security, would you prefer to stay there as opposed to existing shelters? 58% reported that they would, 10% said maybe, and only 32% said they would prefer the current shelters. So this really is an indication of, that how poorly our shelters are doing, or how much more we should be looking at these outdoor alternatives. Of those who endorsed a legal campsite, 44% were currently in shelter at the time of the survey. And I know we've experimented with this a little during COVID, and it's something we may want to consider, or, improving our shelters. Participants ranked, we asked what would be most useful services to be improved within the shelter. Housing case management and case management were at the top. Furthermore, findings indicated a need for a variety of deeply affordable housing options and the transparent pathways to housing, along with that housing case management.
Hi, my name is Cesar.
We'll talk about substance use.
Hi, my name is Cesar Espinoza Perez. I'm a queer sex worker, substance user, and a peer researcher. So I'll be sharing the results of the substance use section. So a third of the participants reported using substances. On the graph on the left, of people who reported that having an issue with substances, here are the percentages of those reporting issues with the following substances. We can see methamphetamines and alcohol are at the top. And on the right, we can see that the percentage of who responded that a particular substance being the primary substance that they've used treatment for, or they've gone through treatment. Next slide. All right, so what we can see largely is that substance use treatment is working for the majority of participants. So 80% of participants who attended treatment reported that it either partially or totally helped them meet their goals. Let's see here. So the most common treatment settings were residential treatment programs, followed by AA or NA, detox programs or other peer support groups, and finally medication-assisted treatment. So, however, over half of those reporting substance use issue remain untreated. And then I just want to also be clear that although using harm reduction approach, we also must understand that not everyone who reports using substances being an issue needs, wants, or is ready for treatment now. Next slide. Let's see here. So some of the significant barriers to accessing substance use treatment is that the access is too confusing or difficult to navigate. The rules are many times too strict. There's a lack of availability, especially for residential treatment, and treatment is too costly. And also, here's just a quote that from one of the participants. When I was homeless, I was really looking online for like where I can go for help, and there wasn't anything online. There wasn't anything like that. You can't really ask Google, what can I do? The only way I found treatment was by going to a hospital. Let's see here. All right, next slide. So in the survey, we found that findings are split on harm reduction and abstinence-based. 54 responded that they would likely remain in treatment if active use was permitted, while 46% reported that indicated that an abstinence only is what worked for them. And next slide. So what we also uncovered is that post-treatment, many people are returning to homelessness. So here on the graph in the gray, we asked what was your housing situation during your current or most recent treatment, and in the pink purple was what was your housing situation immediately after when you left your most recent substance use treatment program. So what we can see, let's see here. Sorry, I'm getting a little confused here. But what is clear sometimes is that when an individual returns to homelessness after treatment, is that homelessness in itself is traumatic, and also there can be many triggers in the environment that where they are by. Next slide. So the recommendations. So what unhoused people with substance use issues need: permanent supportive housing, rental subsidies, and step-down housing post-treatment. Support navigating the complex treatment system, individualized support through case management, increased outreach and treatment options for people who are not ready for substance use treatment, and recognition that substance use issues are health problems that must not be stigmatized, and I will just personally add, not criminalized. Ultimately, we need to fully implement treatment on demand, that is a fluidity between supportive housing and treatment, a system that accommodates across a range of client readiness, flexible duration during treatment, trauma-informed care, and expand substance use services in drop-in centers. Next slide.
Great, and with this, we'll hand it over to Tracy, who will discuss mental health.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. As you can see, nearly half of our survey respondents said that they currently have or have experienced in the past a mental health challenge that could benefit from treatment. I'll now present a few findings from this section of the study. So first, I'd like to start out on a positive note by what is working. One of the most joyful groups I got to conduct was with the residents of a certain type of permanent supportive housing known as co-ops. When someone in San Francisco was brought into care during a psychiatric crisis, they are often most often first taken to a clinical setting like the hospital to stabilize for anywhere from 24 hours to several weeks. After that, they can be transferred to an ADU or an acute divisionary unit where they can get stabilized on medications and get connected to services. After a few weeks at the ADU, those who are doing well are eligible to move on to a residential treatment facility where they stay for several months, allowing them to set up new routines, get a job, attend group therapy groups, go back to school, the kinds of activities that make them feel connected to the larger community. Those who do exceptionally well in these programs but still need long-term support can then be eligible to move into the co-ops. These are permanently affordable apartments with about 2 to 4 residents each. These co-ops offer a good balance of independence and support from a dedicated case manager that residents can call on whenever needed. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, the supply of these kinds of housing placements is dwarfed by the demand. And too often, people who have stabilized and thrived in the supportive environments of the ADUs and RTFs are flung back into the churn of the streets or the shelter system because there is simply nowhere else for them to go. There are not enough beds in these kinds of programs to meet the need. And that's just a relatively small percentage of people who aren't released directly back to the street from psychiatric crisis services, which sadly is the huge case for a number of patients. Next slide, please. Among the most common response we got when we asked why people weren't accessing mental health support was, first of all, they were trying to. One young woman we met was living with her partner, her 2 children, and their dog in one room of a short-term shelter in the Tenderloin. She started crying as she told us how she how desperately she wants a professional to talk to who can help her manage her stress levels and help her guide her children more safely through this time. She told us that all the places she had contacted for support had wait lists so long that there was no knowing when she was going to be helped. We heard this repeatedly from other participants from many other circumstances as well. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, one second. Other barriers to accessing care included a lack of information available explaining the types of therapy being offered and how to get into it. A number of respondents felt that their physical disabilities kept them locked out of mental health care. Many expressed a deep desire for therapists who reflected their own lived experiences as people of color, people who speak languages other than English, and those who are queer or transgender. Next slide, please. We understand the supportive residential treatment facilities for people with mental illnesses are expensive in the short term. But when compared with the costs to the city of allowing people to spiral into endless cycles of psychiatric crisis, stabilization, and then return to the streets, it is simply the only sustainable solution, both economically and morally. We also heard about the myriad of ways that police interactions serve to compound trauma and desperation. When someone is in a psychiatric crisis, our city should be dispatching skilled counselors to help them get to safety and link them to services, not sending armed police officers. There are many other recommendations in the full report, but for the sake of time, I'm now going to turn it over to Caesar, who will describe the situation for trans and gender nonconforming people struggling with homelessness.
Hi, this is Caesar again. My pronouns are he and him. So now I'm going to talk about I'll just read this quote real quick. So access and education are a big deal to my community. There are a lot of people who just don't have access to services, housing, and jobs because of their skin color, gender identity, criminal history, or housing status. PROPC is a way to rectify the systemic exclusion of people who daily face these oppressions. Next slide. All right. So binary gender classification and anti-trans discrimination made many transgender people feel unwelcome and unsafe in the city's shelters. Many transgender participants reported experiencing transphobic harassment in shelters. The primary reason for transgender study participants' departure from a shelter was to escape mistreatment. And in addition, 36% left because they timed out, while 16% were kicked out. And I just have to read this quote here from a trans Latina. In my experience in shelters, many people want to victimize me. For example, harassing me in the bathroom. They tell me I have to go to the men's bathroom and not the women's. This is hate-based violence. And so here we also have a graph here of the respondents who used the shelter in San Francisco in the past 5 years. And this is already broken down. Next slide. So our recommendations are to prioritize hiring transgender staff to serve transgender shelter and other service users. Create trans and LGBTQ friendly only emergency housing that can keep trans and non-binary people safe. Adding gender neutral and more private bathrooms and shower options in all shelters, rehabs and other facilities. End police involvement and invest in mental health crisis intervention and restorative practices in shelters and other homeless service programs. Next slide. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that's all. So we can just take any questions that the committee might have.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all your work. I'm a big fan of CBPR, so just really appreciate this presentation. So I see Member Ledbetter. Do you have a question or comment?
No, sorry, that's me leaving my hand up too long.
Yeah, I noticed with this, I
forgot to lower.
We all have to make the effort to put our hands down. It doesn't do it automatically, so apologies for that. But it looks like there's no questions or comments at this time, but we are just so grateful for this presentation. And I know that the committee would love to do a deeper dive on the work that you all have done, which is really impressive. So we'll now go this time to public comment. Is there any public comment?
Members of the public who wish to provide public comment on this item should call 415-655-0001, access code 146-118-8903, then pound and then pound again. If you haven't already done so, please dial *3 to line up to speak. A system prompt will indicate you have raised your hand. Please wait until the system indicates you have been unmuted, and you may begin your comments. Please note that you will have 3 minutes. Checking now. There are no callers on the line.
Okay, again, thank you to all of our amazing presenters, and thank you to Member Friedenbach for this great research, and we'll definitely come back to it and do a deeper dive. So thank you all. So we'll now move to item 8, discussion on our planning for our next meeting. So setting dates and any potential agenda items for our next committee meeting. Is there any members that want to request agenda items? Member Nandra.
Hi. I think we'll probably end up talking about this for when we're planning the retreat, but I think probably want to have a little bit of a discussion on governance and process for the committee. This, as I said, it might end up on the retreat agenda, but if not, just think it's a priority for us just to figure out our structure and the decision-making process.
Absolutely, that's definitely on the agenda for our retreat, in addition to deeper dives on the data that we're getting. So thank you. We'll now go to Member Miller.
I am concerned because I know that we were able to, or the city was able to house a few thousand people. Now, at least in the Tenderloin, the tent count is down in the 20s or early 30s. What I'm concerned about is that the time is running out under HUD. And I want to really start looking at how are we gonna support the people for ongoing housing? What's the plan? How many people are in what kind of housing? How we can sustain that? How we can open up other kinds of housing? Things like that. I think it's very important to get the foundational information, but I also think that we're kind of looking at a looming time bomb that I want to make sure that we are able to get in front of, so we don't have, hundreds or thousands of people coming back onto the street.
Thank you for those comments. We'll go to Member Reggio.
Tacking on to Member Nagendra's point on governance, I think somewhere we should distinguish between, or see if we can understand the differences in role among the several related committees. I'm thinking of the implementation work group for mental health, for example. Are they planning in that regard? Are we planning in the same regard? How do we link these things? I think of the role of the local homeless coordinating board, for example, and our relationship to that board. So those would be things that along the way, I think we'll look at.
Thank you, Member Reggio. That's a great point. I know there's a number of moving pieces and governing bodies that we need to be coordinating with. So thank you so much for that. Is there any other members that want to propose agenda items for our next meeting? Member Ledbetter.
I don't know if it's for the next meeting or the retreat, but it might be helpful for us to see a tutorial on the homeless management information system, if that's the primary source we're using. I think there's a lot of interesting racial equity data modules being built out through the Stella program. So if that's going to be our fundamental one, it might be helpful to look at stuff, but I know there's multiple data systems. So I don't know how we're going to approach it, but don't want to recreate there.
Thank you. I see Member Friedenbach and then Member Nandra. Did you want to speak as well again?
Yes, but I'll wait till.
Yeah,
Yeah, Member Friedenbach.
So, oops, sorry, I was talking while I was on mute. We mentioned it earlier in the meeting, but I think going into with very specific requests on how we want the information laid out. One thing that hasn't been mentioned today, but we still need the backfill, 198 million that needs to be presented to us for discussion, approval, not approval, whatever, in line item detail, any of the other program money in line item detail. Julie Ledbetter mentioned the kind of like breakdown of, I think Cynthia was wanting this too, exactly how much money is going in what category and how many people are being served. And in the strategic plan of HSH, they had a really clear graph on that, but that was a couple years ago from 2017. So it would be good to get that updated so we can have a big picture there. And then the stuff that I think, the basic things, I'd like to see what are the properties that that have been talked about by the city in terms of, when I had mentioned boarding care facilities, but are there other, can we look at the pipeline, the affordable housing pipeline, bring some of that forward, have it go to homeless people? Like what are kind of like those sorts of opportunities that we can use this money to have to do some capital and some purchasing of things. So I think getting that information data-wise would be really helpful and broken down in a very tangible way.
Awesome, thank you. And I'm taking notes on these requests, and also, please email us data requests as well. So I will now go to Member Neandra.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, I should have mentioned this earlier. So Jenny actually brought up a little bit of what I was going to say, which is, I think, one for future presentations, and the presentations were super helpful today. Just again, I think I'm asking for what a lot of people are asking for is just details on exactly what people want to use Prop C funds for, and how that fits into their overall budget, so that we can really understand what the asks are and kind of how, where that funding may have been coming from before, or whether it's new funding, et cetera. So any details around that in future presentations would be really helpful. And then again, back to this idea of kind of really having a better understanding of what any of the agencies that are putting funds into homelessness or housing, whether it's outreach, mental health, behavioral health, housing, permanent supportive housing, because it's really spread out over the different agencies. It would be great, and maybe this is a huge ask, but for us to be able to see kind of a funding pie, what percentage is going to outreach and services, what percentage is going to rental assistance versus permanent supportive housing, et cetera. And so that we can understand what the gaps are. And I wanted to say, if this is appropriate for the retreat, we have, UCSF has access to CCMS data, and we have to get permissions to use it, but we can also help put together a fuller picture of kind of the scope of the problem, the scope of the population that we can help bring to bear, also some of our data to the retreat that might help us kind of look at the scale of the problem and where resources are going, so that we can see kind of what the match is.
So just to make sure I'm capturing what you're saying, Member Neandra, so the multiple agencies sort of feeder into housing or supportive housing from behavioral health versus other agencies, or sort of what that?
Just kind of seeing where homeless, because there's clearly a lot of outreach and services happening. There's clearly, that are dedicated to homelessness, to people experiencing homelessness, and they're spread out over different agencies. So just trying to get a sense for what it looks like. I'm not sure if that's looking at different agency budgets or not, but we can see what's available, but that would be really helpful.
Awesome, thank you. These are really great. All right, I see also, I think that's it.
I forgot.
Oh, the folks, member.
One thing. I'm so sorry.
No worries. I just can't, because if folks don't lower their hands, it's hard to know who wants to speak or not. Sorry, it's not automatic, but Member Friedenbach.
Yeah, so I'm clicking it after I speak, but maybe that puts it back up again or not. I don't know. But anyway, but I wanted to one thing we had talked about at the last meeting to make sure that we hold is to develop some kind of unifying principles, like, that then we can kind of we have our big picture. These are the things that we want in terms of our priorities, and then we can kind of judge the stuff coming in against that, and develop consensus around that, I think is really important. And then I think, this was kind of said, but obviously we need to know the unmet need. How many people are going into coordinated entry and getting sent back to the streets? They're going into PES, getting sent, what's the unmet need? And how does that break down racially, like, other demographics? Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
These are all really great. And definitely, as I mentioned on email, for our 2 retreat sessions, I envision that happening: governance, governing principles, committee structures, like if we want to have work groups under this, this committee, as well as the other part of it is looking at the data, like you mentioned, looking at the demographics of unmet need and some of the other data items that have been presented today. So I see Member Ledbetter, is there?
I did have one more thing.
Okay.
My hand actually is up this time. And thank you, Chair and Vice Chair. You guys did a great job today. Sort of speaking to Cynthia's point, I think we want a map of like a system model with understanding the strategies and understanding the exits from housing. And I think we heard a little bit from Abigail in that, San Francisco's been a huge PSH town, like we've done amazingly well with permanent supportive housing. It's not the only solution. And we're also seeing through the presentation from the revolving door that it has its own limitations and need for quality improvement. So I would like to know specifically some of the forward thinking ideas around things like shallow subsidies, which we have very limited experience with in San Francisco, but will serve a lot of people. Or what's our sort of, we're really embracing rapid rehousing and other sort of short-term rental assistance models. So just some of the thinking around that, just to make sure that we're really planning for multiple strategies, even if they're not currently major strategies that we use. Thanks.
So just to add to that, I just want to make sure that they don't forget to bring like the diversion piece. I think that ties into there. And I think Abigail said she was going to bring it.
Yes, thank you. And I see I see Laura Marshall. You have your hand raised.
Hi. Just from a logistical standpoint, do you want to kind of nail down the retreat information? Because I think that's coming before the next meeting, and want to make sure we're confirming the dates and kind of the goals for that.
So I know that Mary as well and others have did a poll for all of our availability. Do we have the results of that poll?
We do have the results of that poll. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 time slot that seems to work the best for most. It would be Thursday, November 5th from 1 to 4.
Okay.
And then we also have Monday, November 9th from 1 to 4. And we have Tuesday, November 10th from 1 to 4.
Can you say the third one again? I'm sorry, Mary.
Yes. So the third one is November 10th from 1 to 4.
November 10th. So Tuesday, November 10th from 1 to 4.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the fourth one is Tuesday, November 10th from 2 to 5.
Okay. So either Tuesday 1 to 4 or 1 to 5.
Or 2 to 5.
2 to 5. 1 to 4. 2 to 5. Sorry about that. So is there because we need 2 of these sessions, is there one of these dates that folks would prefer less than the others that have been mentioned? We have Thursday, November 5th, 1 to 4 p.m. Monday, November 9th, that's 1 to 4 p.m. I believe as well. And then Tuesday, November 10th, either a 1 to 4 or 2 to 5. And we are 2 sessions that we're gonna.
I think it might be good to have them. I know these are long days, but it might be them back to back, like the 9th and the 10th, so we can kind of have that continuity of conversation. I know that's tough for people's schedules, but that's what I would recommend.
I would prefer that as well.
Yeah, sounds good as well. I see Member Friedenbach, you have your hand raised.
I said I would prefer that as well, the 9th and 10th. Yeah.
Is there anyone that objects to that if we do the Monday, November 9th, 1 to 4 p.m.? And then is there a preference over the 10th, 1 to 4 or 2 to 5?
Chair Williams, I do want to say that Brett Andrew had to jump off the line, but I can go ahead and let me see what he specifically said that he can or can't do. So on my tracking sheet, it looks like he's unavailable on the 9th, but he is definitely available on Tuesday, the 10th from 1 to 4 and also from 2 to 5.
Okay. So we have a member that could not do the 9th and the 10th. He cannot do both those days.
Is he available on the 5th?
He is not available on the 5th.
He's not available the 5th or the 9th?
Like that.
That's correct. But also, I mean, Julia, did you say that you were available on the 9th and 10th as well?
Yes.
Okay, because the original response that I got that you weren't available, so there's a chance that if you pick these two dates that Brett may be able to be available, but we can coordinate. But it seems like those two dates have the most people.
So would that work for you, Julia, if we did the 9th and the...
Yes, I'll make anything work.
Okay, so we need to circle back, Mary, with Brett, because it sounds like the rest of our committee is available the 9th and the 10th, and it sounds like that's the preference to have these, and I think that's right on to have these back to back, just so everything's fresh. So is there a preference on the 10th, the 2 to 5 or the 1 to 4 p.m.?
I would prefer the 2. I mean, I'm going to make it no matter what, but I would be missing something else. Yeah.
Okay, 2 to 5, is there any objection to doing Tuesday, the 10th, 2 to 5, in addition to the November 9th, 1 to 4?
Can I jump in a minute?
Sure.
I think it's important to have Brett there and have all this. And I'm wondering if someone could outreach to Brett and if he were available either, if we landed on the Tuesday as one of our dates, the second time, and then take whichever date we can get all, is it 7 of us or 9 of us, whatever the number is. So either Thursday afternoon or Monday, I think it would be very significant to have us all there.
Yeah, no, we're going to do that outreach.
Okay.
Also, Mary, I just checked the Excel spreadsheet that I sent you, and I had availability for both of those days. So maybe there was an error somewhere. Maybe he really is available because I put okay for those times.
So we just need to circle back with Brett, and I think he can do the 9th. Is that correct? Or he can't do the 9th, he can do the 10th. Is that right, Mary?
So he can do the 10th. And then on the 9th, he said he was unavailable. And then it was Julie Ledbetter that was unavailable on the Monday and Tuesday. But from understanding, she's available now. Is that correct?
Let me check. I'll make anything work, but let me just double check on here.
Well, it sounds like we really just need to circle back with Brett to see if we can make the 9th happen, because it sounds like everyone is available those 2 dates. And I think they will be the Tuesday, November 10th, 2 to 5. Just member Friedenbach is requesting to accommodate another commitment that she has, and it doesn't seem like there's any objection to that. So the main point is just to really get back to Brett on the Monday, November 9th, 1 to 4 p.m. if he can adjust, and we'll circle back to the committee if there's any challenge with that. All right, do we need to go to public comment? Is that have to get used to that every time?
Okay, so members of the public who wish to provide public comments on this item should call 415-655-0001, access code 146-118-8903, then pound and then pound again. If you haven't already done so, please dial *3 to line up to speak, and a system prompt will indicate you have raised your hand. Please wait until the system indicates you have been unmuted, and you may begin your comments. Please note that you will have 3 minutes. Checking now.
This one.
There are no callers.
All right. So we'll now move into adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Yeah. Exactly.
I'm sorry.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, thank you. We just need a second.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of adjourning at 12:29 p.m., say aye.
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 All right, so thank you, everyone. Great meeting, and we'll be in touch in between on planning for the retreat.